For the next few hours.
You are not going to believe the company.
This company.
You're going to bankrupt your mama's company?
At least I have the radio to keep me company.
On 93.5 and 107.5, The Fan.
There's a ton to talk about. It's always the case, I guess, right? When we're reconvening on a Monday coming off of a weekend. But Don Fischer is going to join us coming up about 30 minutes from now. I think most people are aware of Don's comment, and I totally agree with him, from Friday night. And I get the fact that, in the heat of a broadcast, although Don's the ultimate professional, and he's been doing this for 51 years as the voice of Indiana, I think a key point that should be made, because I saw a lot of misquote about this, but for those that are unfamiliar, in Indiana's game on Friday night, Don Fischer had made the comments, well, Eddie, you've got it here, in Indiana's game up in Madison, Wisconsin. I believe it was directly following or in the fallout of a technical foul or flagrant foul from C.J. Gunn, and Don Fischer had this to say.
And I have never said this before in my 51 years behind the microphone at Indiana University, but I am embarrassed for this ball club. Not because of the score.
Now, I get it. And I'm not playing that to pick on Don at all, because I totally support and agree with what he said. And that won't be necessarily the epicenter of our conversation with him. But I want to point out, I think a lot of people, because I saw a lot of quotes about this from people saying Don Fischer said he's embarrassed of the basketball team. He didn't say that. He said he's embarrassed for them. And I think it's a very distinct difference, because by saying you're embarrassed for them, what you are saying is they should be better than this. I'm embarrassed for them because I know they're better than this. And the mental lapses and the lack of discipline with which they play has to be frustrating, and especially when you are somebody who has been calling games for that program for that long. So, and as a matter of fact, I had sent a tweet as soon as that happened. I sent a tweet that said, Indiana basketball is an embarrassment. They have this is me talking, they have no discipline, no heart. They're an embarrassment. And I stand by it. And individually, do I think they're bad guys? I don't know them. I don't think that. But I do think that, and I don't buy into necessarily the whole thing of it has to be, you have to be from Indiana to understand what it means to play for Indiana. First off, for a 17-year-old kid right now, when you say they don't understand what it means to play for Indiana, it hasn't meant that in 20 years. But there is some truth to the fact that you have some kids that probably don't necessarily understand everything from what the fan base anticipates and expects. But we'll get into that over the course of the show today. Lots to talk about. Pacers last night in Phoenix on the short end, but Jimmy Cook, who is wearing his Kansas City Chiefs gear today, I assume you did not see much of the Suns-Pacers game, correct?
Yeah,
statement?
look, you had honesty last week. I'll have honesty this week. I saw the final 6 minutes of that ball game. Did not get a chance. Obviously went back and rewatched some of it, but live did not get the opportunity to go on that West Coast journey with a ton of Pacers fans. Main takeaway late, and I think that this is probably the consensus in terms of the early returns, very early returns of Pascal Siakam in a Pacers uniform, is it's going to take a little bit of time, and it's especially unfair to draw a rational decision when it was so clear, especially late in that game from an offensive standpoint, they really could have used Tyrese Haliburton. I get why. It's so impressive that he was able to return as quickly as he did. I get why he didn't play last night. It's a long West Coast trip. You don't want to risk injuring him further. I don't blame the Pacers for resting him, but you could tell, at least me watching the final six, just longing for those two stars to be paired together against two stars on the other side in Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. They obviously don't get that. They still hang around in that game. They have chances in the fourth, could never really get over the hump, and the Suns are able to kind of outmuscle you and outstar you to some extent to win. And they end Jake a road trip where this is prior to the Siakam trade. When you asked me what did I want out of this trip, the bar was low. I said 2-4 because I didn't know how long Tyrese Haliburton was going to be out. The fact you got him back for a game and couldn't get that win in Portland is frustrating, but 2-4, not the end of the world given the circumstances they were in.
You know, the NBA is a league of ebb and flow. And players have peaks and valleys and slumps and then streaks. The truly great players, the elite players, are those where they do not have the stretches of enigma. You know game in and game out what you're going to get. That defines really, that's what separates great players in the NBA from good players. You know, I'm trying to think just off the top of my head, like a good player in the league. You know, Tyrese Halliburton is probably a great player at this point, right? You pretty much know night in and night out what you're going to get from him. Each time he steps on the floor, you know you're probably going to get 90% of the time. You're going to get anywhere from 15 or more points and probably close to double-digit assists, right?
Yes.
And then there are good players in the NBA. Grayson Allen's a good player. He goes out like last night, he hits a couple shots. But one night he's got 18, and then he goes 2 games where he doesn't have over 6, and then he's got a 25-point night. That's a good player. Benedict Mathurin, when he was drafted, I think that we all, in defense of Benedict Mathurin, the thought process was, that automatically we were ready to just point out he's a great player. It's a great pick. He's a top – and Indiana was thirsting for the fact of a superstar because of all the reasons that we've laid out on the show many, many times. But also, it had been since George McLeod when we had seen a player in this market drafted that high. And George McLeod was a good player. He wasn't a good player with Indiana. He had a lot of things that went against him when he got drafted. He lost both parents like within 6 months of getting drafted, and he went into a depression. And they had him trying to play point guard. And then he went to Dallas and got rejuvenated and became he reinvented himself as a shooting guard as opposed to, and that's when he became a good player. But I think because Mathurin was drafted where he was, we thought this is going to be a great player for the Pacers. Well, the stretch that he's on, Jimmy, to finish the road trip was not good. I mean, what is he, like one of his last 16 or something like that? I mean, he has not played well. But at the same time, there are also games where he is really good, and he definitely has, like, you'd rather have him than not have him for certain. But the way that he plays off of Siakam, Jarris Walker's starting to get some minutes, which I like. So, they're starting to find different areas, and it's going to be curious with Benedict Mathurin as Walker gets more minutes and as Siakam is mixed in. Just to see where Mathurin's, I don't mean minutes role, but just his placement within the offensive sets where it comes. It's going to be interesting to watch. Good afternoon to you, by the way. My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook, you just heard from. Eddie Garrison here as well. It is Query and Company on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. We got a loaded show today. As we'd mentioned, Don Fischer, the voice of the Indiana Hoosiers, is going to join us coming up at the bottom of the hour. Mike Chappell, the dean of football writers covering the Colts, going to join us at 1 o'clock today. Scott Agness will talk a little Pacers at 1:30, and then we're going to talk a little football at 2 o'clock, right, Jimmy? We'll get into your Chiefs more and more.
Yeah, we'll look at the entire divisional round. Of course, a little bit from my chief, Charles McDonald of Yahoo Sports, going to take some time with us, recap the entire divisional round, and look ahead to what should be a storyline-filled, entertaining championship Sunday coming up this weekend.
I had said, I was certain of this. Maybe I'm done with my guarantees. I thought for certain a number 1 seed was going to fall. Because usually that happens. Usually there's an upset. But pretty chalk all the way through. You got a 1 and, is it 1 and 3 in both? Is that right?
Yes.
But I thought Green Bay was going to get it done over San Francisco.
They had it, man.
They did. I mean, they had it lock, stock, and barrel, right?
Yeah, I mean, believe 2 interceptions in the fourth quarter, if I'm not mistaken, by Jordan Love. Yeah, 2 interceptions in the fourth. And look, this is a weekend of 2 memorable kicks, one outstaging the other, of course. The Green Bay missed a kick that would have effectively put them in a situation where your game is tied instead of being down. And then maybe that's a drive where instead of having to rush and feel like you need to be another Green Bay Packers quarterback in kind of Brett Favre-esque manner, Jordan Love going across his body on first down with 50 seconds to play when you didn't need to. And then, of course, Tyler Bass yesterday. But from that Packers game, yeah, I mean, it's one of those where there's a reason for the Green Bay fans to feel like they've done it again. They have found another generational quarterback, and they are going to be set for the next 10, 12, 15 years, whatever you want to map out a career. There's another reason to look at and think, though, you had that game on the road, and you're, 4 minutes away from going to an NFC Championship game when your season looked dead to rights a month and a half ago. Just a frustrating, if any of those ones was going to go down, I don't know that I would have picked it to be San Francisco, but boy, did the Packers make them work for all of it, even though you need to take into account that Deebo Samuel, losing him as early as they did, definitely impacted San Francisco.
You know, the conspiracy theorists were out in full force after, and I can say this now because he made a full recovery, thank goodness, but after the Damar Hamlin incident, I'm talking about his health scare, the heart incident.
Yep.
You know, forever there were people that were saying that the Damar Hamlin we were seeing everywhere was fake, right?
Forgot about that.
Fake Damar Hamlin. So the Buffalo Bills went all in on that and went literally with a play call called Fake Damar Hamlin, right?
Yes.
And that did not go well for them, although it turned out to not be a huge issue because Kansas City turned the ball over. Now, what was with the heavy side there?
Why are you doing jet sweeps to your fifth best wide receiver in the red zone? Hand the ball off. I know it doesn't matter. They won, whatever. But like that, the talking point and narratives in sports shift based on one play. They did it once earlier in the game to Mecole Hardman. He doesn't do anything.
Oh, you're talking about Kansas City.
Correct. But like that's your point about the Damar Hamlin play. It looked awful by McDermott, and then Kansas City fumbles it in the end zone, and that's a play that almost gets lost because of Tyler Bass.
Each other out, right?
Correct. Right.
Here's the other thing. Last night in the NFL, if you did not watch, I would assume most saw it, but Buffalo came down and with just over a minute to go had a relatively, by NFL standards, high percentage field goal. And Tyler Bass went wide right, and Jim Nantz brought back the ghost for Buffalo Bills fans immediately of, you know, the most famous words in Buffalo, wide right. And
poor Scott Norwood catching strays on a Sunday.
Totally. Right? Now, here's the thing. I know it's easy to say, man, that kid for Buffalo that missed that kick. And, I mean, I felt bad for him because they showed him on the sidelines on the bench. He's all by himself, and you could tell he was despondent. But you know what? It didn't matter. It didn't matter. They needed a touchdown there. They needed a touchdown, and if they'd have kicked that field goal, then theoretically you say to yourself, yeah, but they'd have gone to overtime. No, they wouldn't have. They wouldn't have. He hits that field goal. The game's tied. Kansas City goes down, and in 3 plays, they're in field goal range, and they win the game on the last minute.
Yeah, I mean, they averaged 9 yards a play. Like, the thought that Buffalo was suddenly going to find something defensively to limit them, yeah.
I mean, there was no doubt that that's the easy narrative, right?
Correct.
But wasn't going to happen.
Which is why I respect, like, I don't know where this take lands today. I respect what Josh Allen tried to do. Like, everybody points to, okay, go over the middle to Diggs, and you have a first down there, and then you get a closer chance for a touchdown. I get that. But that play where he misses, and I can't even remember the name of the wideout, so Eddie, please help me out, where he misses Shakir and throws it at his feet, and it looks like maybe he gets his lineman pushed into him, so maybe that affected the throw. That route, that same route concept, is exactly how he burnt them in the divisional round 2 years ago, where the corner and the safety get confused, guy's wide open, and that's a throw Josh Allen makes all the time. Now, maybe you say, well, the Chiefs go score a touchdown, then it doesn't matter. That's fine, too. But to your point, Jake, you go for the throat there in Josh Allen's mentality because that's a throw he makes probably 9 times out of 10.
Now, I'm going to, in terms of the NFL over the weekend, I'm going to disagree with Andy Sweeney from this morning. I think the Lions story is great. I think for people with do the Lions have really any, other than other NFC North teams, and even then, I mean, do the Lions really have, like, arch enemies from a fan base standpoint? So if you're a fan of an NFL team that the Arizona Cardinals, the Minnesota Vikings. Maybe that's a bad example because that's a divisional rival, but the Atlanta Falcons, the New York Jets. If you're a fan, the Indianapolis Colts. If you're a fan of a team that is not alive and thus you have no rooting interest in the playoffs itself, you got to root for Detroit, right?
Yeah, I mean
just because they've been. Come on, like it's as hard. Like literally,
there's Team of Destiny vibes around them to the point that you can't not root for them. If you have
it kind of feels like they've hit. It's fitting that they play in an indoor stadium because it feels like you can see the ceiling, right? And it's probably this. Like, do you think they're going to go in and win in San Francisco? Probably not.
I mean, it feels very. I don't know what the line was, but last night I thought it was like 7 or 8 in favor of San Francisco. I think it's going to be a close game. I really do.
I do
think they'll
too.
get a chance.
But still, I think that the pressure they can put on Jared Goff and just it's going to be tough sledding for Detroit for sure.
There's no pressure on Detroit. If you're a person that views pressure as mattering, like, yeah, I get it, the weight of the city, and that's fine. And maybe you argue, well, no, they could finally get to a Super Bowl. Of course there's pressure. Not to the extent of San Francisco. San Francisco has the same vibes of every other contender in this 4 or 5 year window where this is supposed to be like the redemption for Kyle Shanahan, the Niners, and they're finally going to get there and get it done at home. I know some people don't like the narrative of house money, but there's a feel of that around Detroit. Like you have literally nothing to lose on Sunday.
This from Nick. I'm a lifelong Packers fan. Go Detroit. I mean, there is no Jimmy Cook. I will ask you.
All right.
What annual sporting event draws in the interest from non-regular fans of said sport more than any other?
Super Bowl.
That's hard to argue because the TV numbers for that would say so. I'm talking about an annual event that the office rallies around, everybody gets involved.
March Madness.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
And what does everybody love about March Madness?
The Cinderella, baby. The underdog. March
Madness is made, and it's funny because truthfully, when the Cinderellas have a shelf. Cinderella had a shelf life, right? We knew Cinderella Midnight, right? The same is true for Cinderella stories.
Sure.
We in sports, we love a Cinderella story, but we don't want it to screw up our championships. So in March Madness, we love St. Mary's and Gonzaga when they first broke through, and the schools that made Northern Iowa, George Mason, all of those, right? But George Mason was an unbelievable story when they got to the Final Four, and then they played in the semifinals, and the ratings tanked because people are like, come on, I want to see Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, North Carolina, UCLA. And the same is true here in the NFL. Like, it's hard to say in the NFL that you could have a Cinderella because it's the 8,000-pound gorilla. So even the team that gets no love and no attention is getting massive love and attention in comparison to other sports. But the Detroit Lions are the Northern Iowa, George Mason, St. Mary's of the NFL because it's been forever since they've been – I wouldn't even say forever. Like, they've never been relevant. Even when they had Barry Sanders, they weren't relevant. They played on – it was like, oh, yeah, the team that gets beat on Thanksgiving every year and has that poor Barry Sanders. Like, the entire narrative of the Detroit Lions is literally the fact that they've had the greatest running back and arguably the greatest receiver of the last 30 years, and both retired early, and no one blamed them for it. So you got to be happy for them, right?
Yeah.
And I think most people are like, yeah, San Francisco, like – that's just one of those franchises you always hear about. So I think most people that don't have a rooting interest either, other than San Francisco are like, yeah, let's go Detroit, go Lions.
You look at the Niners and you see a team that has championships already in the trophy case. They've done stuff in terms of success for most people's living memory that's recent enough to where you look at Detroit and you say, oh, remember that NBC graphic where they're showing what types of cars were popular when the Lions last were in conference championship games? It was great. They had like the Model T, and they were just going through the list, and then you got to like the Ford Bronco, and that was about it.
The Ford Bronco, baby. Let me tell you, the Lions in 1991, well, actually it would have been January of 92, would have been in the NFC Championship game. The Ford Bronco was a popular car, and it had a shelf life of about 2 more years before finally the most famous Buffalo Bill ruined it for everybody. And then O.J. Simpson took one and went on the I-5, and it was like, okay, well, let's shift towards the Navigator or the what was the other, not Expedition, what was the big Ford car for a long time there? Not Lincoln Navigator. Is it Expedition? Ford Expedition? Anyway, the Bronco kind of
I think you're right. Yeah.
went by the wayside.
It's back now. Total redesign, but it's back now.
I like the new ones. It's the old Bronco 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I like those, actually.
They're nice.
Kansas City Steve had invited you, Jimmy Cook, to a Chiefs watch party, but you opted not to go, right?
Yeah, we have a thing. Like, I'm only a Chiefs fan because I was born into it from my oldest brother or one of my older brothers, rather. And we went to his house like we do every Chiefs game and watched it there. So I did appreciate the invite. I hope it was a raucous time at Dave & Buster's.
Now, how many people were at your watch party?
8.
And is it like super nervous, cussing?
Yes.
Is there alcohol consumed?
There is a little bit of alcohol consumed, yes. There may or may not be a pregame and postgame shot, depending on how things go. So,
Eddie, did you have a good weekend?
I did. Got to spend another day with you. That's always fun.
Yes. I'm sure you were thrilled. We did Indiana Sports Talk together on Saturday evening, correct?
Correct.
And we were supposed to have Paul Corsaro, the head basketball coach of not supposed to, but he typically calls in on that program, but was unable to do so, Eddie, because
he and his wife, Brooke, welcomed their first child into the world. He got a win, then he got another win.
That's a win-win, baby, right?
Yeah.
Congrats, Coach Sorrell. That's awesome.
Now, you last night, Eddie, would have been running the board for the Pacer game, correct?
Correct.
All right. Your overall thoughts now, they went, what were they, 2-4 on the road trip?
Yes.
I thought last night actually was somewhat encouraging, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
A loss is a loss. I get it. But they just, man, it was frustrating down the stretch in the last few minutes of that game. They had so many chances to take the lead. I think it was 4 straight possessions where they were trying to get the lead. They eventually did. Buddy Hield hit a 3 that got them the lead.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, just, actually it was, as much as we talk about Kevin Durant, who was great, it was Bradley Beal last night that I thought was really big down the stretch.
Yeah, I would agree for you with that as well. And the end of that game kind of felt like a playoff game in this aspect of every time Phoenix had the ball, after they went down 103-102, they hit their next 5 shots. 4 of those came where they were switching the Pacers defensively, and Phoenix was hunting out Buddy Hield. And they were just attacking Buddy Hield religiously. They scored 4 straight times on Buddy when he was in defense, and then they subbed out Buddy Hield and put in Ben Shepherd at the end. But like you said, you have to be, just encouraged with the fight because obviously Phoenix has those 3 stars. They're on, I think, a 5-game winning streak now, and the Pacers were hanging in there without their best player. And I was just a little bit frustrated because final 5 minutes of that game, Pascal Siakam doesn't get a post-up, doesn't get an offensive set run for him. So you just trade for this guy who's a 2-time All-NBA, 2-time All-Star, but you don't get him involved when you need him most, going down the stretch when you need a bucket.
Ford Explorer, by the way. Thank you to everybody that pointed that out to me. Ford Explorer. I don't know why I had a brain fade on that because I loved Ford Explorers back in the day. Absolutely loved Ford Explorers back in the day. As for the Colts, by the way, Mike Chappell going to join us at 1 o'clock today. Look, the reality is this. There has been no update, nor do I anticipate that there will be one by all account of late, on the health condition of Jim Irsay. This is not a big town, and so, there are always rumors or innuendos that fly around. I'm sure many people have probably heard some variation of different rumors. You know how those things work and how that operates. And so you have to go on the baseline from a responsibility standpoint of what we do know to be definitive. And what we know to be definitive is that the Colts had said a few weeks ago that Jim Irsay was battling an upper respiratory illness and that his condition, according to Chris Ballard, was stable. And that is the most recent thing that has been reported, and the Colts since then have essentially said there is no update. And I understand that. I understand that he's the owner of the franchise, so, the people who are issuing that, you have to trust what they are telling you. And I would assume that at some point, there will be an update. But for right now, their word is that there is no update on the condition of Jim Irsay. Obviously, you hope for the best for that, not only because he is a very likable and philanthropic individual, but also just for the stability of the franchise itself here within Indianapolis and what he means as truly, there are some owners that are not day-to-day involved. Jim Irsay is, and very involved. And I think maybe there might have even already been some areas where you would think that if he was in the building, things might have been handled differently just in terms of coming off of the season itself. But we shall see where things go moving forward from that. But Mike Chappell going to join us about 1 o'clock. We'll talk not only about just the Colts in general, but also what exactly transpires in this period when, you're kind of sitting back. It's just so odd, right, as a franchise, because all of a sudden the season's just over, and you're like the people that were running with Forrest Gump, where you're in the middle of the desert, and you're like, well, now what? Now what do we do? And where, what are the operations for the Colts right now? That's one of the things we'll talk about with Mike Chappell. But when we come back, he is the radio voice of the Indiana Hoosiers, who had a disappointing game in Wisconsin on Friday night. Don Fischer joins us, and he does so in just a couple of minutes.
Hey, this is Lisa Stofan. Heard the Mark Patrick weight loss
Indiana has some time off, actually, before they will be in Illinois coming up on the 27th. That's a 3 o'clock start on Saturday, coming off of their loss at Wisconsin. Don Fischer, the radio voice of Indiana, joins us now on the program. And, Don, I guess I'll go right to the elephant in the room here. I agreed with you, and I was watching the Indiana game, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Don, but I think people misconstrued when you had said about being embarrassed. I heard you say for them, and I think by that it's just there's an expectation that at this level of basketball there needs to be a greater discipline with your emotions over the course of the game. But your overall expansion, if you could.
Well, quite simply this. Two situations like that in the last 2 weeks, it frustrated me. And it frustrated me because these players have been told about this. They've been warned that you don't do these kinds of things. Every player gets that indoctrination when he comes to school. And obviously it's happened twice. Now, granted, I didn't think after I got to see the replay, the slow motion replay of CJ's situation, I didn't think that was as egregious as I thought it was in real time, but it still can't happen. And so I was embarrassed, not about the team, not about the play of the game, nothing about that at all. It was about the situation taking place for a second time, and I just felt like that needed to be said, but I didn't probably put it in quite the terms because everything was misconstrued like I was blasting the team and all that kind of thing. That's not what I was doing.
Don, did you after the fact, look, I think Don Fischer is probably the pillar of the most respected member of the Indiana basketball program, quite frankly. I think the fan base would absolutely say that. And I did not, and I apologize for it, get to hear the postgame. I was listening to the game, but I didn't hear the postgame. Did Mike Woodson say anything to you about it?
Yeah, we talked about the fact that it happened, and he says we can't have that kind of thing happening. He was – I know he said something a little bit different in the post-game media press conference, but in our post-game, he simply said, we can't have these kinds of things going on. It can't happen again, something like that. So I'm paraphrasing now. But, yeah, he was contrite in that sense as well.
With that, Don, one of the guys that and I hate to pick on a player. I mean, these are college players, I get it. But at the same time, it is a little bit different now with NIL and everything else. I know he's been injured. And we've talked about it. It's been a theme here. Is it time for Indiana to start getting different rotational backcourt players aside from Xavier Johnson? In other words, and I hate to say it this way and sound like I'm kicking a guy when he's down, but if it hasn't kind of jump-started for Xavier Johnson at this point, is it going to?
Well, I can't answer that question. I'm not the coach, and I can't make those decisions because he sees them in practice. He sees what he wants to see. And without question, it's up to him to make those decisions. That's not up to me for a broadcaster to make that kind of a statement. So I can't honestly, Jake, and I apologize for not being able to answer it, but I'm answering it truthfully. I don't know. That's up to the coach. It's up to the coaching staff and their decisions as they make them going forward.
Is there any update, Don, on, I guess, just the health status of Khalil Weir? My understanding is turned his ankle. I would assume that was in a practice because that kind of was a surprise, I think, that he was not available for Wisconsin. But do we know where things stand for that?
I don't. I know that he did. He obviously injured himself in a practice session. He had a boot on. I think he was even on crutches at one point. I don't know if it was that significant. All I can tell you is they're trying to be as cautious with him as they can be, which is what the doctors always tell them to do in those situations. But I haven't heard any update.
Don, there's a 9-0 run by Indiana, first 5 minutes of that second half to get them within, I think, 7. And then like 2 minutes later, the gun incident happens. When you look back at where things got squirrely and got away from them, where it's such a big loss on paper, do you point to that gun incident, or was it a larger just things starting to pile on for them and Wisconsin being a pretty darn good ball club in their own right?
Well, there's no question Wisconsin's really good. But there's no doubt that started the downfall. And when somebody gets kicked out of a ball game, it's not just affecting that player. It affects your basketball team. Let's face it. That's just the facts. And to have it again, have it happen a second time in 2 weeks, that is frustrating beyond belief for the coaching staff and for the rest of the team. And there's no doubt about it that it had a factor. Indiana was able to score a bunch of points in the second half, and they hung with Wisconsin the rest of the way. In fact, outscored them by a point in the second half. But the damage was already done, and obviously that situation didn't help because Indiana was on a drive at that point, or at least they were playing better than they had earlier in the ball game. But as Mike Woodson said at the postgame show, you can't give up 91 points and expect to beat anybody. And offense was very good in that ball game. At least it was more so than what we saw in the first half, and certainly better than what we've seen the last couple of weeks. But you've got to play better than that, and you got to play that through the ball game for 40 minutes. You just can't take that in one segment of the contest.
Voice of the Hoosiers, Don Fischer, nice enough to take some time with us. Don, you'd mentioned in one of Jake's earlier questions the conversations you had post-game with Mike Woodson, and you obviously have addressed it. Expressed your frustration with a play of flagrant fouls becoming a consistent part of this team at this stretch of the season. Do you get the sense, based on those conversations and just the overall vibe around the program, that this is something that's correctable, that it can be further ingrained where, I mean, accidents happen, right? Like, you're not going to say if it's an accidental call that, it's in the same vein, but is it to a point where the message is clear this can't be a thing?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I know that message has been transferred. So without question, it can't happen again. There's just no doubt. And this ball club, I think, knows that. I think the players now know it, not that they didn't know it before. But I would tell you that the proper actions or reactions to that situation have definitely been addressed.
Don, I was curious of this, and I want your perspective on it. Don Fischer is our guest, the voice of the Indiana Hoosiers. That comment from you, I'm not trying to be you, but if it were me, I would have been almost surprised or incredulous at the resonation that had. I mean, all of a sudden I'm seeing it like in headlines everywhere. What was your reaction to the reaction?
Well, as you know, Jake, I am not on any social media, anywhere, any place, anytime, never will be. It's not my thing. I don't like it. Everybody's got, a comment or something that they can be said, and there's not anything that anybody look, from my perspective, and my frustration was with getting a second situation like that in 2 weeks. And it upset me. And it upset me on not just for myself. I think it upsets our program. I think it upsets the Hoosier Nation. I think it upsets the coaching staff. I think it upsets the rest of the players on the team. You don't want that to occur because then you get a reputation. So from my perspective, that was the frustration I had with it. I probably didn't express myself probably as well as I could at that point. But obviously I said what I said. People took it to the way they wanted it to mean, but it had nothing to do with the coaching staff or the team at that point. It was simply that scenario taking place for a second time.
And Don, here's the thing. I grew up a huge Indiana basketball fan, right? And in that moment, I think you spoke for a lot of people. I mean, I'm not here to try to carry your water, but I don't think you should apologize for it because I think it was a raw emotion and a raw observation, and I think it's one that like 99.9% of people watching thought. I do kind of agree with you that after the fact, when I watched the replay of C.J. Gunn, I thought it probably should have been it looked like he was provoked a little bit, and it was almost like a get me space kind of movement from him. But still, there has to be a maturity level that comes into play there, and I thought that the emotion of the observation was totally fair and accurate.
Well, I appreciate that, but the fact of the matter is, we all, when something like that happens, you've got to handle yourself with a little bit more esprit de corps, so to speak, and with the proper explanation. I don't think that I probably said it in the proper fashion, but at the same time, it is what I felt.
In terms of a positive, Don, to not be completely negative about what happened, although it's obviously frustrating with Wisconsin, I wanted to end with this. I continue to be impressed by just the overall game-to-game approach and I'll say professionalism, even though I know it's technically an amateur sport, of Malik Reneau. I just think that this guy, with pieces around him that it sometimes maybe falls short of what he would need from a supporting cast, he seems to me to be a guy that just brings the lunch pail every single day. But you see it more than I do. Is that a fair assessment?
No, it is. There's no question. I've said this to you, and I've said it to anybody that wanted to listen or ask me a question about this, that I think Malik is without question the most improved player in this basketball team. And I would argue that right now he's probably the best player in this basketball team. He is playing so well. He scores 28 in that Wisconsin ball game. He just busted his tail the entire time. He's starting to get fewer fouls, as was evidenced in that ball game. He's just a great kid. He's just a great young man, a really good basketball player. And I know he's as frustrated as anybody that Indiana's in this losing curve here the last couple of ball games that they've had, playing like they have. And he's trying to do his part, and there's no doubt that he's doing that.
Is there any player, Don, in conclusion here that, and I don't mean this as a negative per se, but is there a guy on this particular roster that is is being put maybe out of position of where their actual strength is, and so therefore their level of play is not totally indicative of what they might be able to bring to the table because they're having to fill a void or play a spot or a position that isn't normally what they should be doing within the structure of the team?
I can't answer that. I'm not the coach. I think what they're doing with the players on their ball club is what they think their strengths and their weaknesses might be. And again, that's all speculative. But I'm not a coach, Jake. I haven't been, never have. I'm not an X and O guy, as you probably have heard me say before. But from my standpoint, I think they're doing the best they can with what they have. And unfortunately, right now, it hasn't been enough in the last two ball games. And hopefully, that this 8 days that they've got in between ball games, I think is critical, especially under the circumstances and at this time of year. And it gives them a chance to regroup and maybe look in the mirror a little bit, and maybe that'll help.
Well, I hope you get a chance to enjoy some of the 8 days off, Don. Maybe get some golf in if you could do that in like 20-degree weather.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to swing a club outdoors right now.
I was going to say, hey, 45 degrees in 2 days, Don. Come on, put on the sweatpants.
Yeah, 45 isn't even good enough for me these days. These old bones won't take it.
I hear you. Indiana in action on Saturday at Illinois. That's, of course, the 27th, 3 o'clock tip, and Don Fischer will be on the call. You can hear it on our sister station, 93 WIBC. Don, I appreciate the candor, the explanation, and coming on and joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, Don Fischer, the voice of the Indiana Hoosiers. And I listen, like I said, I agree with him. And I had several people that were like, look, you don't have to – I like this text that I got. As Don was talking, somebody sends me this. Jake, Don doesn't need to walk back a damn thing. As a huge Hoosier fan since I was a baby, I'm hoping that he, being brutally honest, will finally open some eyes and change some things. It's like knowing your parent is disappointed in you. It should matter and motivate some of the positive change. At least that's my hope. I love IU hoops, but they've lost me. I did have a lot of people, and fans are fans. People say all the time, like, that's it, I'm done. I'm done with it. I'm not watching anymore. And then, they always come back, right? I mean, everybody comes back. But I do think, Jimmy, that there were people that were – I think Don Fischer spoke for everybody in that moment of, look, this is – I just think people were over it. They're 13-7. They've lost 2 straight. And with Indiana basketball, it's just – it seems consistently 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And I think that there is – it comes down to this. There are so many people that watch a team. And when you watch and you're a fan of a team, typically that means that you grew up with this great passion and admiration, and deep down you wanted to play for that team, and you weren't good enough. That's the case for so many Indiana fans. Like I grew up in Indiana and I wanted to play for Indiana, but I wasn't good enough. So your one hope is that the players that are given the opportunity, and I don't care whether it's Indiana, Purdue, Butler, whoever your team is, your hope as a fan is that you are a fan for a reason because it is passionately embedded inside of you. And the least thing you ask or want or hope for is that the players that are given the opportunity that you never had take advantage of it and play with a passion that you have as the person watching in your living room. And you got your painted face and you're at the sports bar and you're wearing your jersey and you call in radio shows and you get on social media and you make your contributions financially, and then you see guys that go out there and just, in your opinion and in your perception, take it for granted, and you're like, why am I doing this? I love this team and they don't love me back. And in Indiana's case, I think there are guys on that team that, and it has nothing to do with being born and raised in Indiana. We're not xenophobes here in Indiana or Purdue or whatever school you root for, but you want players that at the very least look like they have an appreciation and understanding of the opportunity afforded them that fans themselves were never afforded. So when you see a guy that seemingly takes advantage of that or doesn't care or dismisses the passion of it, then quite frankly, people get PO'd over it. And I get it, and I totally understand it. And when Don Fischer says that, I think the vast majority of people hear it and go, amen, brother. Say it louder for the people in the back.
Yeah, I want to echo your sentiment on that, Jake, that Don is, as he mentions in the quote, seen 51 years worth of Indiana basketball. And if anybody is worthy to have that type of weight on their words, make a comment like that, it's Don Fischer. And I'm with you. I don't think he owes an apology to anybody. In fact, I feel like from the broadcaster side of things, the cap should be tipped to him because it takes a level of composure to even phrase it the way that he phrased it. Because with what's happened the last couple of weeks, it would be very easy for that to have been a far more critical statement than it was just an observation of where things are at right now for the program. And as you mentioned, I think speaks for a lot of Hoosier fans, myself included.
Yeah, it just feels different. It just does. I mean, things down there just feel different. And I think there's disappointment because I think people felt like they were handing the keys to the house over to a guy that was familiar with the furniture layout. And it feels like that guy's just walking through the house and not noticing that the paint's chipping. And quite frankly, it's disappointing.
Hey, JMV, thinning hair this year, grow your hair.
Can you look and see?
It looks
Check the
distorted.
map here. I'm looking here.
Cloudy.
Have you seen, though? Like 50 degrees coming up here, right?
I can't wait. Might break out the shorts.
It's a heat wave.
Now, it's going to rain, though. By the way, speaking of rain and flood, we got to get on this, okay?
All right.
Mike Chappell going to join us here in a couple minutes. Matthew, our friend in Maine. For those that don't know, Matthew is a listener of the program who was a diehard Patriots fan, and Adam Vinatieri was Matthew's favorite player. So when Vinatieri came to Indianapolis, Matthew became a Colts fan. And then Matthew, living in Maine, started following like kind of all things Indianapolis, including finally coming this year to the mini marathon and doing the mini. And Matthew had called in. Matthew in Maine had, they had terrible weather about a month ago and flooding in Maine, where Matthew's essentially house was wiped out due to a flood. And so Matthew decided, you know what, like enough's enough. The gods are sending me a signal. I'm going to move to Indianapolis. So Matthew sent me them, and I had made this suggestion. This was my suggestion. This was not Matthew asking for this. I want to be very clear of that. But I know from following Matthew on social media that Matthew lost, literally his home was flooded out in a natural disaster in Maine where, it was literally a state of emergency in the state of Maine. So Matthew's moving to Indianapolis on February 1st. And I had said, look, you let me know what we will put together people to make contributions and donations. And so Matthew basically needs essentially everything. Now, table and chairs, dishes, pots and pans, couch, TV and entertainment stand, a nightstand, laundry basket. Some of this is pretty easy. End table, a step stool, a lamp, and a dresser. So basically, and Matthew sent video. Matthew is not lying. Matthew's furniture and everything, it was gone. It was wiped out due to the flood in Maine. So I will do it probably on social media here within the next week, but we're going to put it together between contributions people can make or furniture that you have that you might be able to donate, and we're going to get Matthew's place furnished for him so that it is unlocked, turn the key and ready to go, right? Because that's what, if nothing else, we should put the company on it, right?
That's right.
Agreed.
My parents just recently moved out of their house. I think we may have some tables, chairs.
See, that'd be huge.
You name it.
That'd be huge. I know that
Plates,
we've got
silverware.
We have Shannon has like a TV, kind of a TV table, end table, so we got that covered, right? I'm sure somebody had mentioned that they would be willing to contribute like a gift card to IKEA, so we might be able to get something there. But I think between the listeners of the program, most people have my cell phone number, and they can let me know if they have any of that stuff. But I will eventually put it up on Twitter, and we'll get kind of a head count on what we have. And Matthew's not asking for much. I know what Matthew has just in terms of the residents here. But that's, in my opinion, that's what we do, right? If we are all together every day from noon to 3, then I think we have a responsibility occasionally to put it to use and help some people out. So we're going to try to do it for Matthew. Mike Chappell is longtime writer of the Indianapolis Colts and joins us next.
The Ride with JMV.
1 o'clock hour underway. Jared Query along with Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison here as well. It's Query and Company on 93.5, 107.5. The Fan joining us now from CBS, WTTV4, and WXIN 59 is Mike Chappell. Chap, I'll get, kind of like I did with Don, we'll get the elephant in the room, I guess, out of the way off the top. I had said earlier, so I'm just going to ask you to basically fill in blanks or correct where I may be wrong. Basically what I just said, I don't know, 30 minutes ago or so, is that while this is a small town where word flies around and things, the old phone drill takes place, the word from the Indianapolis Colts, at least the latest, is that there would be no imminent update on the health status of Jim Irsay, and therefore that would be the one that, responsibly speaking, we go with. That pretty much consistent with what you would hear or say?
That's what I know, and I know people think we should have more firm information. This is right now it's a family issue, and they're keeping this as close to the vest as they can. And I'm sure I've heard things, you've heard things, but until we hear from the team, no, this is where we are, and I'm not going to speculate any further.
Mike, and we'll get on to talking about the divisional playoffs, but I wanted to touch on this. You've covered the team for a very long time. And there does become, obviously there's football implications with Jim Irsay not being around the franchise or in a health situation. But I do think at the core we should reemphasize for people, and you can do it better than I because you know him much more personally, than I do. But while Jim Irsay has had his challenges by his own admission and his own demons, at the core, he is a very well-intended and I think philanthropic and selfless individual. Agree?
Well, yeah, and people see the main things, the cancer research at IU, the Rileys and the homeless and abuse and the kicking the stigma and, the Irsay YMCA and all that. But how many times, and this is at a lower level, that he's at training camp throwing around $100 bills. And there was something, was it in Jacksonville on the road, where he gave some of the maids money that were making up rooms and all this. And that's kind of who he is. And he's as genuine as it can be. He just is. And part of that is driven by just who he is. Part of it's driven by, the more that's given to you, the more you need to give and pay it forward. And that's him. And yes, he's quirky and all this stuff, but at his heart, that's who he is. I sat down with him going into August. This was the 40th year of the franchise in Indy. And he was very open about things. And it was more football and all this, but he said, this is home. He said, when they moved here, this was home. One of his daughters was born here. I think it was Carly. I get my daughters mixed up, and I apologize. One was born in Dallas. One was born in Baltimore. And he's got the grandkids. And he said, this is home. His father's buried at Crown Hill, and he said, I've got plots there. And, so this is home. And he said, when you're at a home, you give back to the community. That's just what you do. And I think some of the areas that he and his daughters have focused on are driven by the problems they've had in their family. Not just him, but his dad was an alcoholic, and and he dealt with that and learned from that, and and then he's got his own demons that he's dealt with. But that's who he is. And if people want to go down different roads about how he isn't that, then that's fine. Then go ahead if you want to. But at his heart, he's a giving person, and he wants the best for the community and the people around him.
The Dean, Mike Chappell of Fox 9 and CBS 4 is our guest. Chap, looking at personnel aspects for the Colts, but this time on staff versus the rumor mill that is free agency, that we know is always continuous, but we're actually getting into hiring season from a coach's standpoint. There was a couple reports that started, I think, from a local reporter in Philly, and then Mike Garofalo had picked it up, that if the Eagles offensive coordinator and Brian Johnson is let go or takes a job elsewhere, who will fill that void? Jim Bob Cooter's name has come up in those reports. Whether or not, I guess, A, have you heard anything like that? And B, if you haven't, if that was to play out, would you see Jim Bob Cooter being a good fit in Philly if that was to happen?
Well, I guess the first thing is the Colts would have to allow him to interview, correct? I mean, I would assume these guys normally sign 2-year deals.
Right.
Whether or not the Colts would hold a coach who, and let's just say Jim Bob would be interested. Do you keep a coach from doing that? I don't know. There have been times that teams have not allowed the guys to take lateral moves, and I guess you can get around lateral moves by making a guy an assistant head coach or whatever. You can kind of get around it. But maybe Jim Bob would. I don't know. I mean, he's got a young, intriguing quarterback here to deal with and see how far you can take him. I saw that, and it's just speculation, and we're in. I'm glad that I watch all this going on now, and I'm not even remotely sorry that the Colts aren't going through this like we did last year, because it just wears your butt down day after day after day of interviews. And you got to interview, 30 people? I mean, they all interviewed so many people last year. So if someone has an interest, I think that's internally you decide whether you want to let a guy make a move or not if he's on your staff under contract.
Do you think Frank Reich would want to be an OC again somewhere?
Good question. I part of me thinks that Frank needs to step away for a year and just take a breath. He can certainly, he has the opportunity with the way things have gone out contract-wise and financial-wise. I think he'll get back in it. I think if he gets back in it will be as an OC. I think he's really good. He was in a really bad situation here that he was part of. Let's not, he was part of why things went wrong here with the quarterbacks. Whether he was part of the problem in Carolina, I sort of think not. I sort of think that they thrust someone upon him and said, make this work. And he said, okay, we'll see what we can do. I think, yes, I think he comes back somewhere as an OC, because I think he's that good in the right situation.
Speaking of coaches that we're familiar with here in Indianapolis, Mike Chappell, our guest, do you think the seat's warm at all for Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia? And is it someone who I like? I mean, I don't know him well, but when I've been around him, I like him a lot. I think people here like him. But is there an indictment on him also that with coordinators going and he's kind of on his own there, that's when things started to dip a little bit?
Well, I would think, is he on a hot seat? Well, I mean, I would think that if they were going to fire him, they would have fired him. We're seeing things now that he's letting defensive coordinators go, and Matt Patricia, who's not under contract, is not supposed to come back. Well, if you're letting him have a hand in those decisions, then he must be having a hand in rebuilding his staff. I mean, again, I'm not plugged into Philly, but everybody sort of panned him for the elevating Matt Patricia to play calling, which whether they would have been that bad with the DC or whatever, it didn't work. And it always looked like a panic move when you do that and it doesn't work. Now, when it works, you say it was a stroke of genius. When it doesn't work, you say that was stupid. But I just would think that if they were going to clean house, they would have done it. They wouldn't. We wouldn't start getting these drib drabs of coaching firings or removals or whatever. So, and again, you've got to decide. We've talked about this with teams in free agency. It's easy to fire people. It's easy to cut players and all this. Then you got to replace them. So you don't fire Nick Sirianni unless you think that Plan B is better. And again, that collapse was historic, considering Super Bowl last year and 10-1, and then they look like one of the worst teams in the league. Well, that's on the head coach. It is. It's his job somehow to stop the bleeding somehow. And boy, if they just could have found a way to bounce back in the first round of the playoffs, and they didn't. They were as bad then as they were during their collapse. But you better be darn sure the guy you're bringing in is better. And there's a few people out there, obviously the Belichicks and the Harbaughs and Vrabel. Vrabel's out there. This is as good a free agency class of head coaches as I can remember. It really is. And I don't know what's the first domino to fall. Is it Belichick? Is it Harbaugh? Maybe it's Harbaugh. I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to go with a curveball here. You ready?
Okay.
I have nothing to base this on, Mike, at all, but I know that'll stun you to know that I'm just speaking from the hip here. Mike Vrabel to Seattle will be the first domino.
Really? Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, maybe. I've not heard much about Seattle and who they've talked with. It seems like so much has been focused on how many times, like in Atlanta, how many times do you need to talk to Bill Belichick?
I know.
I
And
mean,
he is interviewed in Atlanta 17 times.
I'd be
right?
insulted at this point if I was Belichick.
Well, but he's doing it for a reason. I mean, what's he say? He said, "Well, yeah, I'm the guy with 6 Super Bowls, and I need 15 wins. And oh, by the way, I kicked your ass when you were ahead of me 28-3." I don't know what's a second interview. I don't know. I don't understand it. So he can pick where he wants to go, and would he go to Atlanta where they got some really, really good talent? And who the hell is their quarterback?
Well, that's the thing is they've got good talent, but they're missing it at the best position, at the most important position, right?
And we've seen what happens when he doesn't have a quarterback. Whether it's in Cleveland or it's just so I don't know. But and again, Vrabel, you know what you're going to get if you get him. You're going to sort of get, unless he changes his ways, you're going to get the way we build a team is through the way they did it in Tennessee. So yeah, it's just really, really interesting. And I don't know who the first domino is. I get the impression that once one falls, they'll all start falling because that's just the way it works. And I don't know which the first one is. Maybe it's Harbaugh, maybe it's Belichick. But why you have second interviews with Belichick and it doesn't include, and we have a press conference on Tuesday, I don't get it.
Mike, do you get the impression, Anthony Richardson seems like a pretty level-headed young guy and certainly, did all the right things, I think, this year in his rookie year, even though it was obviously then stunted by the injury. Does the play and the arrival of C.J. Stroud put pressure on Anthony Richardson?
Oh, probably. I mean, only that the pressure's there because he's got to be the guy for the Colts and for Indy. He's got to be that, what Stroud has done, and maybe he would have been. I mean, we saw quite a bit of good stuff. Of course, it was only 4 games, and that blurs everything. But I've said from the start that from what I saw, he gives you a lot of reason to believe that he is. And certainly with C.J. Stroud, one, staying on the field, except for, was it 2 games of the concussion, and what he did, different players, obviously, but similar situations with the rookie coach and all that stuff. Yeah, there's pressure because of that, but there was immense pressure anyway. Richardson has to be the guy. He just does, because if not, then you're looking at, 4, 5, 6 years of trying to find the guy. And we saw how hard that is and how difficult it is to be competitive week after week when you don't have the guy. So the pressure was there, more because of C.J. Stroud, maybe, probably, yes, probably. And again, until I'm going to write about it sometime this week later, but it's all going to be about, staying healthy. And I totally understand the concerns with the injuries. I can explain all of them, to where I'm not really concerned, but until he plays 15, 16, 17 games, you have that concern. But I always go back to the same thing that we've talked about here. They knew who he was when they drafted him. Not that he, that he's brittle. That's BS. That's BS. They knew this is who he was. I watch games with Lamar Jackson and some of the stuff Josh Allen does, extending plays and getting loose for 30 yards. That's what this guy can do. And you pair him with a running back like they've got, and if the offensive line played well. So I really like the future, but yeah, pressure. The pressure was there from the start. It just was, and probably increased just a notch because of what the guy did in Houston.
Mike Chappell covers the Colts, the dean for Fox 9 and CBS 4. Chap, you tweeted about this last night, and it was, of course, through you, like a lot of us, reacting to the divisional round games. There's a couple different areas we can go with this conversation, but I'll start first with this. Do you think there'll ever be anything in the history of the NFL as you cover this sport that will allow you to ever forget the Colts' fake punt against the Patriots? Because you brought it up again last night when they run with DeMar Hamlin.
The greatest
with 9
play
men
in the
on
history
field.
of the NFL.
Well, I brought it up because I retweeted it.
Right. Kevin
I
Clark
don't
tweeted
have
the
that
picture.
on-
Right.
I don't have that on Get Save. I try to put that behind me. But whenever somebody brings up stupid punt things, I'm thinking, no, this is, whatever you got, you're number 2 behind what they ran. But I thought that was, they said, well, they had 10 guys on the field. So what? Unless you had like 6 guys on defense, what are you doing? And then they get bailed out by the fumble touchback. So, yeah, it's amazing that it doesn't take a whole lot for somebody, and I kind of give these guys credit that they have these photos and videos at their fingertip that they can grab it so quick and get it on there because I laugh. But it's one of those where you say, yeah, you've got a picture. I was there. we watched it unfold. We tried to talk to these guys after the game. We tried to talk to Chuck to say, what the hell were you doing? And you try to talk to Griff and Colt Anderson. But it was a moment when it's still a moment. It's like it hit me when Buffalo converted 4th and 3 with that swing pass to the I think it was a receiver out of the backfield, and I'm thinking if the Colts complete that, they still had to score a touchdown, but it just shows you execute.
Look, Chap, here's the reality. In this town, you had the Raymond Butler touchdown to beat Pittsburgh in year 1. You got the Marlon Jackson interception. You got the Kelvin Hayden interception to seal the Super Bowl. In the NFL, you've got the Immaculate Reception. You've got the Bart Starr sneak. It's the greatest play in the history of the NFL, the fake punt.
Yep.
I mean, it is literally the greatest. 60 years from now, some guy's going to be doing radio here in Indianapolis, and they're going to be like, do you know that – have you ever seen that play they ran like 65 years?
Chap, do you have the authority? Do you have the authority to get that in Canton? It's not already there. Like, do you have that type of power?
It may be there, like in that room, in the back room where they put things that no one wants to talk about, but everybody wants to see.
Chap, I'll tell you what, and I've mentioned this on radio several times. I don't know if I've mentioned it with you. Have you ever seen the video in I think it was 1970 at the Minnesota Vikings game where some 10-year-old kid at halftime on some demonstration of a hot air balloon and the ropes broke and he tethered and flew right out of the stadium over the lights? You ever seen that?
No.
So
was he okay, I assume?
Okay, he landed 10 miles away in the Minnesota River, and some hunter found him, and he was okay. And then they took him back to the game and dried his stuff, and he went home and got a free Vikings pennant. And then that same year, Minnesota hosted, I think, the NFC title game or one of them, and they decided to have some Viking fly around in a balloon, and that thing crashed into the upper deck of the stadium. And it should be in the Hall of Fame. The video of those two incidents should be there with the video of Chris Collinsworth going, what in the world? It's the greatest moment in the history of the NFL. I mean, I'm just saying.
Well, what was it the last year in Baltimore, Memorial Stadium, where that Piper Cub, crashed into the upper deck?
Really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, you can Google that, and I think fortunately that the fact that they were they couldn't draw fans.
I was just going to say that probably fueled why Bob Irsay wanted to leave, right?
Yeah, but no, it's a picture of remember how they used to the comedy club on the South Side?
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And the plane into the roof. Yeah, this Piper Cubs, it crashed into the upper deck at the stadium. So yeah, but there's all those, and it's I think things kind of one memory hits another one. I remember I actually saw it on TV back when I was much younger with when Mike Curtis leveled he clotheslined a fan that tried to run and get the ball. But it's just one thing after another, and you mentioned all the iconic photos of the Colts. I mean, Andrew Luck diving.
Yeah, the Kansas City game. Yeah.
Was it Donald Brown fumbled? I think it was. So it's just so many cool moments, but God, you just hate that the one that people default to so much is Colt Anderson and Griff.
I don't hate it. I love it. It's the greatest play ever. I love it. It's fabulous.
So it just tells you that it wasn't just a play. Again, when it's people find reasons to throw it up there, it's amazing.
Hey, Mike, I am in this postseason. I do think, and I know it's probably low-hanging fruit, but I think the Detroit story is great. And I think it's great because, number one, they've got a head coach that we all laughed at during his press conference because he made, it was like, who is this guy? And then they have a quarterback that was basically a cast-off that had every reason to say, I ain't going to Detroit. And he goes there and sticks it out, and the team rallies, and it's just a great story. But question is this the ceiling? Can they beat San Francisco?
I still haven't totally bought into Brock Purdy. I just haven't, and I think they're and we'll see if Deebo Samuels plays. But then, boy, Christian McCaffrey is a badass. But I think it'd be kind of cool to see. Aren't they one of the few teams that never make a Super Bowl? I believe Detroit.
Yes. Yep.
I think that'd be so cool, and to see the way they've done it. It's really I've got nothing invested in them, no dog in the fight, but they are fun to watch. And Jared Goff playing with a massive chip on his shoulder. They're great. They're easy to pull for. You can pull for all these teams, but Detroit is really, it's and when you hear his post games, he's not just giving you words. He's giving you emotion and passion and how committed they are. And by the way, they've got some great players. St. John, holy smokes! In the rookie, they were panned for taking a rookie running back as high as they did.
Yeah, and he made a huge play for them. Yeah.
So yeah, easy to pull for. I'd love to see it. Now, again, Frisco, it always comes down to the quarterback. It seems like, and it's pretty bad when I trust Jared Goff more than I do Brock Purdy.
But Goff has played well, though, Mike, right? Like, I mean, it's interesting because I had mentioned this last week. Jared Goff is a guy, grows up in California, plays collegiately at California, takes the Rams to the Super Bowl, and then in that Super Bowl looked totally befuddled. And it was like the curtain had been ripped back. But he looks like he's kind of refound himself in Detroit, and I think has played really well. He's sort of more of a reason that they are where they are than maybe Brock Purdy is. Again, is he a system guy? Purdy, I don't know. But Goff is really playing well. That whole team is playing well. And I'm telling you, you watch Aiden Hutchinson, holy smokes. There were 4 or 5 plays where they didn't block him. And I'm thinking, what defensive or offensive scheme do you have where you leave their best defensive player unblocked? But that's how you build a team with those edge rushers. Yes, a running back. Yes, you need a quality running back, and then the quarterback making plays and that receiver on the outside. So you like the way they've done it. They're not BSing you. They're giving it to you from the heart. It's really hard not to pull for the Lions. It really is.
Chap, I found your piece about not your piece, but I found the piece about the plane crashing into the stadium. I'm going to send it to Jake after the break. It's comical, the picture itself. Last thing for me, though, has anything ever happened from a celebratory standpoint in your life that's made you go full Jason Kelce?
No. Well, no, I leave my shirt on.
Okay.
Was that cool? The only thing would have been better would have been to have Taylor Swift take her top off and drink
Okay. There we go. Now we're out there.
That's him. And somebody said, this is who he is. It's not like,
right.
Wait till he gets in retirement. No, this is him. I mean,
well, and then he picked up the little girl. There was a little girl fan that he picked up to go introduce to Taylor Swift. And you're like, I guess he's the one that could do it because it's basically his de facto sister-in-law, right?
Well, yeah, we'll see. Yeah, wouldn't you like to be at? Somebody tweeted, wouldn't you like to be at, if there's a wedding to have him give the speech to the bride and groom? I mean, no, that sort of brings you back to Detroit. That's who these guys are. Now, with with Travis Kelce, but I think Jason's really, really that guy. You'd love to go out and have a beer, or not a beer, but like a six-pack with
authentic.
on a Friday night.
Right.
How hammered was he at the end of that game? I mean, unless he can really hold his beer, but amazing.
I wonder if he puts his Coors Light on ice. You're the only person I've seen, Chap. I know. And I guess it makes sense, right? But, like, I've never seen somebody get a glass of ice cubes and then pour the beer over it.
Well, I drink less beer then. It makes me drink less beer, which is a good thing. So
that's a smart move. Yeah, that's a veteran move.
Yeah, at my memorial service, there will be I remember at Robbins we had like long donuts and Pepsis.
Yeah, everybody's wearing sweatpants. Yeah.
Yeah, so at mine I'll have glasses of ice, and you got to pour your beer over it. So
beautiful.
And you got to have something to live by.
All right, Chap, we're going to table this for our next conversation because we did it in our last conversation, but people are still asking me, Reggie Wayne, Dwight Freeney, are they going to get in? You're the guy that's got to make the case for him. That takes place when? When is it that you guys will meet for that?
Well, okay, let's put it this way. I really don't want to lie to you guys, okay? We have met, so I know how it's going down. And that's all I can say. Because if I say more, I'll lie to you, and I really don't want to lie to you.
So
Does that clear anything up at all?
Well, so you make a presentation for them, correct?
Yes.
And
Each one of them, yes.
And you have already done that, right?
Yes.
And that's because you're the guy that covered those two respective players.
Yeah, the way it is, again, there's 15 modern era guys every year, and the selector from that market generally – is the guy that does it. Sometimes you have players that, like next year, Adam Vinatieri, I believe it's his first year, and I'm guessing myself and a guy from the New England market will share it. But that's how it does it. We know the guy more. And
so,
and
do
all
you
that,
know what the voting tallies are?
I'll plead the fifth. Yeah, no. Yes, I do.
Okay, and so we will find that out when?
NFL Honors, it's the February 8th, I believe it is. It's that Thursday before the Super Bowl.
And there's going to be people excited here?
There I'm going to plead the fifth.
All right. We'll leave it at that. I respect it. Well, I'll have to – the problem is you had too much ice in that beer, and I can't get the truth out of you. That's the problem. That was a smart move on your behalf.
I'd need about as many beers that Jason Kelce had last night so I could really open up to you.
All right, Chappell. We appreciate it.
Later.
All right, Mike Chappell joining us on the program. Scott Agness will talk a little Pacers coming back from the West and a busy week for them. We'll get into that next.
As America's largest injury firm, we have
Well, okay, let's put it this way. I really don't want to lie to you guys, okay? We have met, so I know how it's going down, and that's all I can say. Because if I say more, I'll lie to you, and I really don't want to lie to you.
So do you take that as Reggie Wayne or Dwight Freeney are getting in, or neither is getting in? Or one of the two's getting in?
I take it as at least one is getting in, but that said, I also take it as Chap rightfully being Chap and walking the tightrope perfectly to I can't share anything.
Yeah, he's not going to say it. I get it. Eddie, how'd you take it?
I took it as neither. Toning his voice a little bit.
What I think Eddie is hearing, though, is that cautiousness of Chap not wanting to say too much. I don't think it's negativity of like, oh, you're not going to like the news. I think it is, hey, this is a gray area, guys. I can't say anything.
Definitely interesting, right? Definitely interesting. Joining us now in the program, Pacers back from a West Coast trip where they went, if I'm not mistaken, Scott Agness and Fieldhouse Files, you correct me if I'm wrong, 2-4 on the West Coast trip, technically, because one of those games on the trip was in Atlanta, which isn't out west. But Atlanta and Sacramento, the two wins they got. I thought last night, frustrating down the stretch because multiple opportunities, but you're adding a new wrinkle to the roster. So let's begin with that, Scott Agness. With Pascal Siakam now and just kind of getting a glimpse, how long is it going to be before we get a real feel for the fact that, okay, they are now cohesive with it all?
Yeah, it's a difficult spot, Jake. Good afternoon to you. Yeah, I mean, joining the team on a road trip, and on top of that, he had a full travel day the previous day, and he's sitting in the MRI scans for several hours. Like, it sounds easy, but that's an exhausting process and a lot to adapt to. So the trouble is for this team right now is while they're home for the next a week really, they have 4 games to get right at it, and so there's not really an acclimation time. There's no real practice time that's obviously in sight. So that hinders what they want to do and what any team really needs. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic about this week and him getting more comfortable, having a little bit more of a walkthrough with the team before games. But truly, I'm really setting my sights on the next week where he'll have, 10 days under his belt. And hopefully by then, Tyrese is back into the full time.
Scott Agness of Fieldhouse Files covers the Pacers there. Nice enough to take some time with us. Scott, should it be a promising takeaway when you look at trades that happened, not like throughout time, but just when trades happen, there's a gelling period. I know you kind of highlight that there, but you can point to that Suns game and think, man, if you have Tyrese there late, maybe that's a different outcome. Maybe they're actually winning by a couple possessions versus just working so hard to try to get over the hump. When you look at these next couple weeks with that in mind, and it sounds like you're doing this, but should Pacers fans be bracing for the fact that all corners of this roster might take a brief step back before taking that step forward the trade was intended to make?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jimmy, mostly because I think the immediate reaction probably from fans here is, all right, it's just on Pascal to adapt, right? He's the only one that has to change. Well, that's not exactly right here because he steps into the 4. Well, that thrusts somebody out of the 4 starting position, which is Jalen Smith, which then directly impacts his backup, which has been Obi Toppin. We see Jarris Walker, who's been out of the rotation. He's needed. He's thrown in, but he's playing the 3 last night. This has a direct impact on just about everybody out there, in addition to just kind of learning where he wants the ball and how he operates and how he operates in the mid-range and runs pick and rolls with Miles Turner. This is a wholesale change for this Pacers team that they all are going to adapt to. So, yeah, that's one big thing that I'm trying to emphasize. And more than that, though, what also makes it difficult is the caliber opponent right now. You'd really like an easier slate, but you come home and you get Denver, Philadelphia, and Phoenix, bam, 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 right there, which is costly. And then the other thing that's playing a key factor in all this is the Pacers aren't healthy right now. And I'm not just talking about Tyrese. You can tell Andrew Nembhard really has not been healthy all season long. It seems like it's one thing after another for that second-year guard who they desperately need right now, not just because Ty is out, but because he's one of their top premium defenders. And so in a game like last night or the night before where they have 2 or 3 opponents that are going off, you really need him and Aaron Nesmith, who missed 3 games on the road trip due to injury. You know that you need those 2 guys to be key contributors on both ends. And so that's an underlying factor here is that several other key rotational pieces aren't exactly at 100% right now.
Scott, who's the Pacers' second best point guard?
I would go T.J. McConnell right now. Jake, what about you?
I'd agree with that. I think that there are limitations to an extent, but, you almost hate saying that because the guy just size-wise probably. But, it's interesting to me because he is a guy that I think at the beginning of the year there was the thought that I think Derek Schultz actually said this best this year in a game where he said every year feels like the year that they try to. I'm not saying the Pacers, but that we set aside T.J. McConnell, and every year is the year that T.J. McConnell busts his way right back through the door, right?
Absolutely. He's a guy that's been counted out, and in doing so, I think he's in the back of everyone's mind, whether that's fans, whether it's opposing teams. It's been, 4 years, I think, since he moved on from Philly, and I still don't understand why the 76ers didn't even consider re-signing him. There were no contractual talks, Jake. He had no idea what he was in for in free agency. The Pacers called. I'll never forget his first day here where he's like, yeah, I wasn't given any promises. The second year of my deal is non-guaranteed. We'll see. And then at the first day at training camp practice, he was in a penny, a jersey, meaning he was on the third team. And so that's kind of how he's been thought of. Yet at the same time, we know beyond the intangibles, which are obvious, the energy, the spark off the bench, the T.J. McConnell inbound steal that he's good for, one per game. There's just something about the way in which he gets this team humming with its second unit. And so part of why I should preface why I responded so quickly is because what I have seen from Andrew Nembhard and how he has not been healthy, how that ailing back and the kidney stone and the bone bruise in his knee. Otherwise, he's probably has the most overall talent. The thing is, what I love about T.J. McConnell's impact is how he gets others involved, how it's never about him, and how he's really mastered that 8-foot fadeaway jump shot. All of this coming off a career year last season, and he's too good not to play. That's what it comes down to for me, Jake, is when I saw him get countless do not plays, coach's decision, that's where I thought it was a little too much. You have to find time for him on the court because he's just too impactful with that second unit.
Speaking of playing, Rick Carlisle in the back end of this trip did start calling the number of Jarris Walker and Ben Shepherd with more consistency than we had previously seen. Was that simply trying to get fresh legs elsewhere, or is he starting to see something, Scott, in those guys that we might see more of, and particularly Walker?
I viewed it more so, Jake, as trying to find some combination that's working right now. And so in that second half, we saw Jarris knock down some shots. We saw defense desperately needed as Phoenix's big three, which hadn't played a ton together, were getting countless scores. I mean, they scored 91 of their 117 points. That's pretty incredible in this day and age. And so I thought that's why, in particular, Ben Shepherd was out there, because we saw the Blazers hunt Buddy Hield late in the game. And I don't understand all the negativity and hate for Buddy Hield. I guess perhaps that's kind of similar to what happened in Sacramento in the end. But from the small social media crowd that you hear from, it's stunning how much negativity right now there is surrounding Buddy and him starting and getting playing time with these guys and trying to find a combination. I think one thing that did surprise me, Jake, late in that game is T.J. McConnell played 0 minutes in the fourth quarter and just 3 in the third quarter. They went with a different lineup, which featured Jarris at the 3, Obi at the 4, Siakam at the 5. I think while those two rookies have stepped up their play, to answer your question, I think it was more about trying to find something that worked and could fit against that Phoenix lineup that was successful.
Scott Agness of Fieldhouse Files is our guest. Scott, I don't mean to segue it in this way, but since this is where the chips are laid out, Buddy Hield is an unrestricted free agent, as you well know. Obi Toppin is a restricted free agent. They have a player option with Jalen Smith, a couple other names you could look at as well. The trade deadline is 2 weeks from Thursday. Are they done? Or, I always get worried when players are on the last year of their deal, or maybe it's a restricted free agent player that would kind of break the bank long-term to re-sign like Obi, and I don't want to see them leave for nothing. Are they at a point where they feel that at all? And if they're not, just straightforward, do you think they are going to make any moves between now and February 8th?
Yeah, it's the whole situation that Toronto just dealt with Pascal, right? They knew they weren't going to re-sign him. That was a contentious relationship that was due for a breakup. And so instead of not getting anything like they didn't with, say, Fred VanVleet in the past, they moved on from him. Now for the Pacers, I think Obi Toppin seems like an obvious choice there just because you just acquired your starting four for the future. Now, Pascal can play the 3, he can play the 5, but I think he's pretty much slotted in that 4 spot. Toppin wants to experience free agency. That's a big reason why there weren't any substantial talks with him before the season on a contract extension with several other members of his 2020 draft class were part of. The Pacers did do that with Tyrese, so he's locked up. Obi wanted to experience free agency and see what he could get out of it. So I do believe it could be a possibility for Obi, and that would make a lot of sense if there is a potential deal out there to further upgrade, because what I've said about this team still stands is that this front office has been at its best when making deals and through trades. And we know through this team's history that they aren't going to have probably a lot of success in true free agency, and the draft is 50-50. Has not been successful in recent years. I don't count the last couple of years because I need to see 3-4 years before you really evaluate a draft class here. But I think the Pacers are still out there. They're still surveying what they could potentially get there, and also in clarifying roster positions. Like sending Jordan Nwora made a ton of sense out because he was out of the rotation and he was at now one of their deepest spots, which is ironic because they had 0 4 players before drafting Jarris Walker. So I think they're still playing ball out there. I could see Buddy re-signing, although it seemed like after what went down in the fall, the Pacers aren't willing to get to a number that's $20 million or more that Buddy is really set on. So if that's the case, you do have to consider moving him if you're the Pacers and getting into deals that might be available. And that was one of the great positives of getting the Siakam deal done last week, is that allowed the front office 3 more weeks to consider other deals now with this new formed roster.
Jalen Smith, does he have a future here in terms of an extension?
I think so, Jake. Yeah, they really like him, his upside, and
or
what
will
he's able
others
to
outbid? I guess is a better way of asking it.
Yeah, I think the Pacers could find a deal for him if they wanted, right? And I say that because they know exactly what he contributes. I don't think he has any extremely high value by any means, but I do know there is interest in him. For example, that was one of the players Toronto was trying to push for, and the Pacers pushed back and said, no, we're not giving you Jalen Smith. Toronto had been trying for Jalen Smith for several years now, for example. Same thing with Miles Turner. And so that's another reason that it informs kind of my decision, my thought here, in that I think the Pacers and Rick Carlisle really like the development of Jalen. The thing is, same is true with Isaiah Jackson, who's in the concussion protocol right now. And so with Jalen, he has that option, so he can opt out of that. Then he could hit the free market a little bit here. But among the players that Jimmy was asking about there, I think Jalen is the most likely of those trio to remain here in the future.
Scott Agness is our guest. Fieldhouse Files is his website. Scott, I saw a story, and it did not overly surprise me, that Paul George had made a comment that Tyrese Halliburton – I saw a podcast that Paul George had done with Tyrese Halliburton, and where he talked about seeing what Indiana was able to do in terms of Halliburton generating a buzz around town during the in-season tournament made Paul George reminiscent of the glory years that he had when he was a Pacer. And then the story comes out that he had contemplated what it would be like to play here with Halliburton. He is the perfect fit for what Indiana needs, quite frankly. But just in that capacity, and I don't know, so that's why I'm asking you this. If you are to re-sign Siakam, which hopefully they do, and you have the big contract of Halliburton, that would give them flexibility to what level? Or would it literally be they don't have room for any other big players?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in saying that is the missing piece, and that would put them and thrust them finally into contender category. Right now I view them as a playoff team, certainly with Siakam, whereas before they were fringe and potentially win a series or so. I don't see anything real with Paul George, quite frankly. Why would he leave L.A.? That's his home. They've got a great situation there with the Clippers. He's paid by the richest owner in sports So you're taken care of. On top of that, you're moving into a brand new arena next year. Kawhi's already re-signed. They're competitive now after adding James Harden to the fold. For all those reasons, it doesn't add up to me. I think it's more just Paul reminiscing and having good thoughts about Indy, and then also thinking about All-Stars, where I'm expecting him to take part in that game, and seeing the Pacers celebrated. But in terms of financials, I haven't directly looked at it, but Tyrese is on a max contract starting next year. Siakam presumably will sign what I expect to be a max contract. Nothing could be discussed, but you got to believe both sides are under the understanding of, hey, we'll make this work, which then makes things very difficult, especially in this market, to offer even someone like Paul or anyone else close to a max type deal. Like, that would really make it difficult. I mean, you're talking, I don't know, probably about $110 million of your payroll off the top of my head based on 3 guys. So that for that reason seems highly unlikely. And would he want to take a pay cut? I can't see him leaving, but you're right. That's exactly what they would love to fill with that 3 guard spot, having a 2-way defender.
He's Scott Agness. You can follow him on Twitter at Scott Agness, Pacers beat writer for Fieldhouse Files. You can check the work there as well at Fieldhouse Files. Scott, always good catching up. Looking forward to talking as the weeks unfold, counting down to the trade deadline and All-Star Weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
And that's Scott Agness. You can hit him with a follow on Twitter at Scott Agness. It was a massive weekend in the NFL divisional round of the playoffs. We'll dive into all of that and maybe where the Colts stand in terms of looking up at what's happened in the AFC over the last couple of weeks with Charles McDonald, who'll join us in 11 minutes.
Are you dealing with foot, knee,
Journey song. I'm not a huge Journey fan. But my favorite Journey song would be Only the Young. So here's my question for you guys. Steve Perry, the lead singer of Journey, it is his birthday today. Would you like to guess how old Steve Perry is?
72.
Eddie?
66.
I'm kind of with Eddie on this, right? Like, Father Time's undefeated, and so you forget how quickly the clock moves. But considering that, Journey's heyday was 40 years ago, Steve Perry's 75 years old today.
Whoa.
I'm like, wait, what? And then I'm like, no, he's like 50, right? And then I'm like, wait a minute. No, I am actually. And I was in like 5th grade when they were doing their thing, right?
That is the blessing and the curse of being in the second half century of your life, Jake.
I'm telling you what, it is surreal. I think most people can relate to this. It is a surreal age when you reach the age that you look back and have very clear and vivid memories of your parents when they were that age. So, like, I think about, like, or much younger even. I mean, now I'm at the point where, I think about things that happened, and I have very clear memories of my parents in it, and I'm like, wait a minute, my parents in that moment were, 45, and I'm 51 now. Like, that's a very bizarre thing. But Steve Perry, 75, surprised me. Charles McDonald going to talk a little NFL next, right?
Yeah, take us through the divisional round of the playoffs. We'll probably sprinkle in, of course, where the Colts stand with Stroud's campaign in the playoffs and look ahead to conference championship weekend.
All right, we'll do it next.
93.5 and 107.5.
National Football League, and if you're wondering how big, Jimmy can show the YouTube audience he's wearing Chiefs shoes.
It's just Air Force Ones. You accused me of this the last time. It's having to be red and white. I don't know.
But you only wear them after Chiefs games.
I don't know what you're talking about.
He's wearing a Chiefs polo, too.
No idea what you're talking about.
He doesn't have the ring on, though. That's the key here. He does not have the Chiefs ring on.
It's not a game day.
Listen, Charles McDonald, we're going to get Charles to vote on this highly debated topic. He's writer for Yahoo, Charles McDonald, who covers the NFL. Charles, are you a married guy?
No.
Okay. Have you been married before?
No.
Okay.
I'm only 29. That'd be crazy.
So here's the thing. Like, I am also, I mean, I have a longtime girlfriend. I've never been married, but Jimmy is a married guy. And okay, so I need you to weigh in on this, Charles.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy, who does the program with me here, is a huge Chiefs fan. And earlier this year, I noticed, my eye caught on a Monday when the Chiefs were playing, that he was not wearing his wedding ring, but instead on his ring finger was wearing a Kansas City plastic Chiefs ring.
It's not plastic. It was silicone. That's important.
Silicone Chiefs ring.
What's the difference?
Between plastic or silicone?
Now, so here's the thing, Charles. And I was saying, now hang on. Like, if you want to wear a game day ring, that's fine, but you can't wear it in place of your wedding band. Your thoughts?
Yeah, put on your pinky ring, you know?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, put on your pinky. What are you doing, dude? Are you going to go try to date the Chiefs mascot? Like,
I mean, look, KC Wolf does seem pretty appealing. I won't lie. I don't know if you've seen him up close, but it was sold as a wedding band.
I was at the Arctic game between the Dolphins, so I got a good look at him. I don't know if that's what you want, though, man.
Depends how cold it is.
Charles, thank you. I knew you were my spirit animal. All right, let's begin with this. You mentioned the cold of Kansas City. I'm going to stick with my theme of the day, and that is the hot team of the Detroit Lions, because I love the story of the Lions, okay? But I'll ask it this directly like I asked Mike Chappell. Does the road end here for Detroit?
Oh, man, this is definitely their toughest test, right? Just in terms of the amount of firepower that San Francisco has, Kyle Shanahan, Brock Purdy's good enough usually to get the guys in position to make plays. Sometimes he can make his own plays. So, yeah, this is going to be a tough test. Like, there's a lot more firepower than what the Buccaneers have, and I think that, like, if you go back and you watch some of those Rashad White runs and you replace that with Christian McCaffrey and the idea of what that could turn out to be, that's I think a little bit scary for Lions fans. But on the flip side, like, they should be able to score on San Francisco as well. Like, this isn't the same vaunted defense from when, like, DeMeco Ryans was defensive coordinator or even when Robert Saleh was. They're a little bit weaker against the run, even though they're still pretty good against the pass. So, that kind of plays into what Detroit does well. I think in a way that this could be a shootout, but this is a tough test for the Lions for sure. And I think it's going to be one of those games where we find out, all right, Aaron Glenn, how good are you at your job? Because you're coming into a situation where you're a little bit outmatched. The Packers defense did a good enough job to slow them down last week, but can you actually finish the job and, kind of not get trampled by the running game?
Charles McDonald is our guest, covers the NFL for Yahoo Sports. Charles, in the hours that have passed since Chiefs-Bills, have you unearthed or determined what Bills fans did to upset the football gods or any other higher powers that may be in terms of yet another chapter of just heartbreak into their fan base? And aside from that commentary, where do they go from here with what the cap number happens with Allen and Von Miller and other just big number contracts that are on their books with a window that you're going to need to revamp and reevaluate now?
Well, look, I'm a Falcons fan, so there's only so much pity I can feel for anybody else because I'm still working through my own issues. Sure. But, I mean, it's pretty bad luck, right? Because even if you go back to the 90s, somehow you make it to 4 straight Super Bowls, you don't win any of them. You have, I think, what is undeniably like one of the 3 best quarterbacks in football, someone who at this rate is definitely going to be a Hall of Famer with the way they produce it and how good they're being in Josh Allen. So you would hope that one of these days you could kind of get this monkey off your back and get past the Chiefs, because the funny thing is they've owned the Chiefs, like this iteration of the Chiefs in the regular season, but when it gets down to it, they just can't get past them in the postseason. And look, I say this from experience. Like, well, it's a little bit different because like when the Falcons kind of hit their big wall of we got to get rid of guys. We're going to be over the cap for a few years, or not over the cap, but dealing with some dead money hit for a few years. Matt Ryan was kind of at the end of his career, so at least you still have this like gravitational force in Josh Allen, I would say, where you can survive some of the losses that you're going to have to take because a lot of people have noted they're about $40 million over the cap space for next year, so. When you're all in on a season like this, it definitely stings to not even make it to an AFC title game. To kind of end up where you've been stuck. You can't get past the division round. You lose again at the hands of Patrick Mahomes for the third time in the playoffs, which is that almost makes it a rivalry within itself. So you're going to have to figure out, okay, we have to get under the cap and be able to add some guys. So you're probably going to lose someone like Von Miller, who. I mean, if we can be real, at this point, it's probably not a loss due to some on and off the field issues. It's not like he'd ever really regained the form that he was prior to his ACL injury. So, maybe you don't really miss losing him, but like if you have to move on from Stephon Diggs, I know that they kind of struggled to get him going again in the back half of the season once Joe Brady took over, but that's still a pretty big loss. And Gabe Davis is also a free agent too. So, I think there's a chance that the 2024 Bills on the field look a lot different than the version that we just saw. But like I said, you still got Josh Allen, so you still have a chance to win the Super Bowl any year that he's there. But this is going to be a huge year for them in terms of reloading and rebuilding because, like I said, something's got to change, and they're over the cap anyway. So now is kind of the perfect time to kind of shake up the organization a little bit.
Charles McDonald is our guest. Charles, one of the storylines of the postseason this year, even though obviously it has come to an end, was the emergence of C.J. Stroud and the way that he has played in Houston and lifting that franchise. Does Indianapolis have a guy, do you believe, can Anthony Richardson be that same kind of talent for the Colts? And does he now feel a pressure on him because of the fact that he is in a division that's got some pretty good young arms?
I think that he can be that. I don't think it looks like how C.J. Stroud does it with just because C.J. Stroud is closer to not he's like full on pocket passer, but he's kind of closer to like the previous generation in a way. But even we saw on Saturday, if they had someone less mobile back there, I think the Ravens could have gotten like 5 or 6 or 7 sacks. So like his mobility is definitely a plus, but it's not what Anthony Richardson brings, where you can kind of base like a run game around how good your quarterback is with the ball in his hands. And obviously, we know the talent he has on the other side. I wouldn't say that Anthony Richardson has a whole lot of pressure on him right now immediately because he's only played how many games, like 4 or 5 games before things kind of before he got hurt and had to miss the rest of the season with his shoulder. So I don't know. Anytime you're dealing with that level of like inexperience, I think you have to give some grace and some leeway in terms of what can happen on the development path. But what you saw to get started was pretty good because I think anytime you're looking at a guy who can be a positive force in terms of generating value on the field play by play, but without even like the great proficiency as a thrower, that's a good place to start from because you're still moving the ball with him, and that means there's a lot of room to get better as far as just kind of developing him as a passer. And I think even with that, he still is not as far away as people want to make it seem. He's got the arm. I think he understands how the game is played pretty well. He's just got to work on the accuracy a little bit. And then you have one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the league, which is going to be pretty important because, like you said, C.J. Stroud's there. I think we all know how talented Trevor Lawrence is, and if the Jaguars can put that together, we know that can be a force. So you don't want to lollygag too much, but at the same time, he needs some time to actually get his feet wet and be an NFL player for a season.
I'm guessing you did not have a Gardner Minshew question on your bingo card when the week began, which would have been earlier today.
No,
but
I did not.
But look, Gardner Minshew. I have always said, Charles, backup quarterbacks are like donut tires. They're great if you need them to get you a couple exits. If you're expecting to go all the way on your vacation destination with one, you're probably in trouble. I thought he played well for Indianapolis this year, but you know where the limitations are. but he's a good
Right.
backup. Will they be able to retain him in that role, or is there actually a team out there that will look at Gardner Minshew and offer him a contract to be their spot starter for a year or two?
I mean, it's always possible. And if you're Gardner, you know which situation you want to be in. You want to play. You don't want to be sitting behind Anthony Richardson. So, I mean, look, I think if you start looking out at the landscape, and especially if you think it from the viewpoint of like, all right, well, what teams could be trading up for a quarterback in the draft, or what teams could possibly be in the market for one? There's a lot of teams this year who will probably be looking to upgrade their quarterback situation in some way. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if Gardner Minshew ends up starting somewhere else. It's not like, if you're a team where your goal for 2024 is kind of let's start looking like a professional football team again, I don't think that Gardner Minshew is necessarily a bad choice for that. But like you said, it's only going to take you so far, and I think the best way to have a Gardner Minshew on your team is what the Colts did this year. You pair him with a pretty talented young rookie, and if that guy gets hurt, then you can still play competitive football for the rest of the season because Minshew's not like a total scrub. But at the same time, it's not going to be a situation where you're going to go on a Super Bowl run. You just, if things go right for you, you can hit 10 games, and then maybe you can get to the wild card. But that's not really the goal for most organizations that are somewhat relevant, I would say. So, it's a good spot for Gardner because a lot of teams need quarterbacks, but you're not going to find yourself in a spot where you're committing to him long term. So I would be a little surprised if he ends up with the Colts as a backup, just because I think he should have a market. But if he doesn't, to me, that seems like a no-brainer to try to get him back in the building.
Charles McDonald covers the NFL for Yahoo Sports, is our guest. Charles, there's been a number of solid to great defensive units in the NFL this year, and Kansas City has been right up there with them. They are able to show that yesterday against Josh Allen. Now it's the Ravens once again on the road in Baltimore this weekend. We know how good the Ravens defense is, but from an offensive standpoint, with Zay Flowers, with the potential return of Mark Andrews, how good the Ravens are from an offensive standpoint, how similar or different is a defensive game plan for Steve Spagnuolo and the Chiefs for Lamar Jackson compared to what they just faced with Josh Allen?
Well, I think this is actually a good deal harder because I just think the Ravens are in a better spot with Todd Monken than the Bills ended up with Joe Brady. Like they just have more answers than they did last year, especially when what's his name? Greg Roman was the offensive coordinator, and then Tom Monken comes in. They split more to 3 wide receivers, 11 personnel, and kind of spread the field out for Lamar Jackson instead of having it be a congested space where he has to make things work in a kind of more difficult manner. So I think that this is a really, really tough matchup for any team, really. But one thing that, if you're a Chiefs fan or you're the Chiefs defensive coordinator, Steve Spagnuolo, and you're watching that Houston game from last week, for a half there were blitzes to be had. The Ravens didn't do a great job of picking up all of them, especially in the first half. I know they kind of got better as the game went along, but the offensive line is not a super strength for the Ravens. Really, it comes down to Todd Monken has figured out kind of how to get the most out of Lamar Jackson in certain manners, especially increasing production from the passing game. So getting Mark Andrews would be back would be a big thing because then you have a 2 tight end punch with Isaiah Likely, who's I think developed to be one of the more talented tight ends in the NFL, and to me he's a guy that could break out pretty big next year if Andrews is not there, or if Andrews gets off to a slow start because he's still dealing with his injury. I mean, this is it's a pretty difficult offense to stop. And it all starts with Lamar, to me, who is just playing with so much more control than he has over the past few years. He's kind of gotten a mastery of this offense, and over the past 6 weeks, it's kind of hard to find guys who have played that much better than Lamar, especially when you factor in the 56-point game against the Dolphins to close the season. You had a 33-point game against San Francisco where he was pretty much flawless in that game too. I mean, the guy is just out of his mind right now, and now when you pair that that level of talent with Gus Edwards, with Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham, and spurts, I mean, there's a lot of space for this Ravens offense to attack, and that really starts with Lamar Jackson up front. So it's tough for anyone, but I think Steve Spagnuolo, if you're gonna have any defensive coordinator that's not named Mike McDonald, Steve Spagnuolo is a good one, because I think once you get into the postseason, it's good to have a few changeups and fastballs with your blitzes, and I think that's kind of where the Browns faltered week 1 against the Texans, because they run a pretty static defense and make their players go and get it, and that was good for most of the season. But once you get into a team that can scheme against you, that's where you can struggle.
Switching over to the NFC, Jake mentioned the story of the Lions and how that's a rallying cry for a lot of people, but specifically to Jared Goff. I know he's a number 1 overall pick, so I don't want to sell him short here, but is he a case study even in an instant gratification society? Just because it doesn't work out in the first spot doesn't mean you can't still be a franchise caliber quarterback? Or does he still need to take it a step further, and this needs to end with them hoisting the Lombardi Trophy for that to be a definitive statement?
Well, I kind of struggle with the Jared Goff stuff, because I look at it and say, look, we've been here before with him. We've seen this before with him. He's played in a Super Bowl. This isn't something that we haven't seen Jared Goff do before. I think for the Lions, like the imperative, and really for any team once you get to this point, is winning the Super Bowl, obviously, because you're 1 game away. You're in the NFC title game. To me, I still see some concerning things with Goff, especially when they're not running like their quick action, play action stuff where he gets to turn his back to the defense, where we know that that's where he's been at his best, going all the way back to the Sean McVay years. I think that's going to be an interesting test to see, like, if he can grow his own game into being a more dynamic drop back passer than he's been at times. So, like, until and it's weird because the bar for Jared Goff, I don't even know if it should be this high. But when you're playing on a team that has these aspirations, like the Rams did, maybe you need a little bit more sometimes. To me, he's still kind of the same guy that he has been in the past, which is not a bad thing at all, because Jared Goff at his best, so he can lead like a top 5 to 10 offense through the playoffs and could get you within 1 game of the Super Bowl. It just, the Rams found that at one point. Yeah, I think we need a little bit more, and they got it, and they got past that hump and got to a Super Bowl victory. But with the Lions, I think you're a little bit too early in that time span to figure that out right now. They're going to extend Jared Goff, as they should. They pass on an opportunity to trade up for an Anthony Richardson to make that happen. So we'll see what happens this coming weekend, because I think when you're at the level of a Jared Goff where you're almost there but not quite there, people can kind of take it as a game-by-game referendum and throw-by-throw referendum, because they know they can feel how close they are, especially with the other pieces on team. So I think he's kind of in the same spot that he was with the Rams, and we'll see what happens on Sunday against San Francisco, because that Lions team is really, really close, obviously, to actually getting things done and winning the Super Bowl championship. Okay,
Charles, lastly here, from a football standpoint, I've got the names of 3 coaches. I want you to tell me in your gut instinct what team these 3 coaches individually will be coaching next year. And you can certainly, in the case of the first one, say the team that he coached last year. Jim Harbaugh.
Jim Harbaugh, Chargers.
I would agree. Yeah, I think he's second interview now for him there. Mike Vrabel.
I will say, just last thing on Harbaugh, if he can get it into his contract that, hey, any punishment, anything the NCAA finds out about this past scandal, I won't get fired, I would bet he goes back to Michigan.
Okay, interesting. All right, Mike Vrabel.
Mike Vrabel, that's tough. I'm going to go with because I was going to go Philly before, but they didn't end up firing anybody. I'll go Washington for Mike Vrabel.
Okay, interesting. All right. Bill Belichick.
Atlanta.
You think that is going to happen?
I mean, they're the only team that's in on him. So
the other question then becomes, who's going to be the quarterback there?
That's I have no idea, because the problem is they won too many games to kind of trade up for quarterback, and I think people are saying that you can just trade up for a quarterback and go get your guy, but I think that kind of lacks the context of what's going on this year because the Bears have the first pick. They're almost guaranteed to use that on a quarterback with how Justin Fields kind of finished the season. Washington at number 2, they need a quarterback, and you may be able to just bring the hometown kid in with Caleb Williams. I think that would be, kind of a big boost in a lot of ways for their franchise. 3, the Patriots, they need a quarterback too. So, if you're going to trade up for one, it might be pretty expensive. So I think the Falcons, they could find themselves like in the Justin Fields area, maybe Kirk Cousins, maybe Gardner Minshew if things go really wrong. But I don't really know who's going to be the quarterback now. I just know
that's
what
we know in Indianapolis is Gardner Minshew's your guy when things go really wrong, right?
Yeah. That's what it has been for him the whole time, really.
Charles, you're a younger guy. You're not married. We established that. But looking at your photo, you look like a guy that would have a dog. Do you have a dog?
I have 2 dogs, but they don't live with me. They live in my parents' house.
Okay, so here's my question though: when you go to your parents' house and you see the dogs, please tell me this, because you're a bigger guy. You look like you could be a linebacker. You have a dog voice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I knew that because you're a sensible guy.
Jake
I can
has
tell.
a test theory there with if you have a dog voice or not.
I'm convinced if you don't have a. What's that?
Look, they're dogs. They're dogs. Sometimes you got to talk to them different than you would a human.
Of course. So you're not a sociopath. That's good. So you sided with me on the ring situation, and because you're a sociopath.
To be clear,
if
I'm
you don't
not
have
a
dog
sociopath.
voice.
I'm also on the dog voice side. I want that to be clarified.
Wait. Hold on. Well, in terms of dog voice, do you mean like cute dog voice or like, hey, I'm in charge dog voice?
No, like when you go
Happy
to your
to see
parents' house. Like, give me the name of one of your dogs, Charles.
Oh, like Rosie is one of them.
Yeah, Rosie. So when you go to your parents' house, you haven't seen Rosie in a while. Rosie's jumping around all excited. You don't say like, hello, Rosie, it's nice to see you. You say like, and Rosie's a good girl. That kind of thing, right?
Yeah, you're right, exactly.
Yeah. And Rosie would look, if you were Jimmy, Rosie would look and say, why are you wearing a Chiefs ring on your wedding finger? Even Rosie knows. Hey, Charles, appreciate the perspectives and the conversation, man. Always happy to have you on. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Charles McDonald, who sides with me on the ring situation.
I mean, I can't get rid of it now. It's part of my brand now. It's got to be like I'm not. Regardless of how many people continue to tell me I'm a madman, I'm sorry.
Jimmy, are you not going to share what you told me last week regarding the ring?
Oh, is that worth a tease?
All right, you will tell that. Excellent. See the way you two are working in tandem here.
How about that?
Tell me on the other side what you learned regarding your Chiefs ring that looks like you might have gotten it out of Lucky Charms. We'll do that next.
Kevin Bowen here for 5 Iron Golf.
All right, so Jimmy, apparently, now let's back up for everybody that is new to the program. My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook is the other voice you hear on this program. Eddie Garrison is the CEO of the company. It's
Good day.
Query & Company. We are excited, as always, when listeners call in to appoint them as a different responsibility within the company. For example, we have Paul, the director of Giddiness. We have Derek, the director of Veteran Affairs, et cetera, et cetera. We have any woman is automatically a CFO because we're not good with money. And Jimmy is the only of this trio that is married, although, Eddie, you're basically common law married, right?
Pretty much at this point, yeah.
And that has to be, common law has to be living under the same roof, right?
Yes.
Living in sin, as they say. And then I guess I would be common law married based on length of time, right? Even though
Yes.
not living into the same room. So, Jimmy is a married guy, though, and on wedding days, as a Chiefs fan,
careful. Game days.
Game days. On game days,
That's an important clarification.
that is. On game days, he takes off his wedding band.
Wait, I want to jump in there real quick. It's true, but I have a traditional gold wedding ring at home. I still view myself as a little irresponsible, so I wear these little like silicone, just pack of like 5 wedding bands. Very common that like people in my age group wear this.
You do see it more. I'll give you that.
So like to be clear, it's not like we're taking a gold ring, and it still matters. I guess it's a symbol. Go ahead.
So Jimmy replaces the cheap wedding band that he has with a cheaper one that is so on game days on his wedding finger he wears a Chiefs ring. Now, I'm not going to totally mock that. When I was a kid, I had a football ring.
Thank you. That's good.
That I wore. I was also 9.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But nonetheless, so you have the Chiefs ring. Now,
Correct.
Eddie divulged that you had come up with a confession. Is that right, Eddie?
Yeah, so last
No,
week.
not a confession, a revelation.
Oh, yeah, it was a revelation, not a confession. But somehow last week, Jimmy and I got on this conversation about this Chiefs wedding band ring. And at the start of the Charles McDonald interview, you were talking about how Jimmy was wearing Chiefs gear, rightfully so, since his Chiefs won yesterday with the Buffalo Bills.
This is very tame, by the way. I'm wearing a polo with a little tiny logo, but go on.
And I suggested, hey, he's not wearing the ring today because it's, and then you said it's not game day.
Not a game day.
And so we were harassing him a little bit. And I was like, hey, there's a story you told me last week of another person taking the side of Jimmy Cook in this situation.
I am at brunch with my wife on last Saturday before the Chiefs played the Dolphins. And the waitress in between, like, had brought us our food and everything, saw the Chiefs ring on my hand and goes, "Is that a Chiefs wedding band?" And at this point, I'm very defensive about it now because once my co-host and partner in crime calls me out on it, now I'm going to get mocked here in this brunch place. She's like, "My husband is a diehard Chiefs fan. Can I know where you got that? I want to take a picture of it so I can maybe look and get it for him."
Now,
so she took a picture of the wedding band,
now
and then I'm assuming went and got it.
Did she say because I want him to wear that instead of our wedding band, or did she say, "Oh, that's cool, he can wear it on his right hand"?
She didn't specify where to wear it, but you could tell it was on my ring finger. Like I was not hiding it. It was clear what was being done.
No, I understand, but did she say, "Is that a Chiefs wedding band," or did she say, "Is that a Chiefs ring"?
I believe she said wedding band.
So you think that she was buying I'd like to.
I think she was fascinated by it, which is what I think everybody is.
Now that certainly is, that's a possibility. She was fascinated by it, right? She actually probably thought to herself, "I didn't know that there are 2 people with this derangement in the same state." Right?
There's only one person who can settle this all in the conversation, Mrs. Cook.
Well, Mrs. Cook is fine with it, but Mrs. Cook, albeit, Haley does not like cocky teams, and so she's kind of done with the Chiefs. Like, she's not done with my fanhood, but like she views them as very.
The Chiefs definitely have entered into, and I remember saying this about the Golden State Warriors, and people are like, "You're crazy." Now it's come back, so what I'm about to say, you're going to go, "No," you're going to forget that there was a period where this was true. But I remember when Steph Curry first was doing his thing, and there was a minute there where Steph Curry, it was like watching, NBA Jam, like when the guy he's on fire, like everything was going in, right? Patrick Mahomes had that feel. I remember saying Patrick Mahomes felt like Steph Curry because, like, you're watching this guy do things effortlessly that you're like, "Holy cow, this is unbelievable." But with Curry, I remember saying on the radio that eventually the whole, like, mouthpiece out, like, laissez-faire approach is going to have a backlash.
Yep.
And it did happen. Now, it kind of came back once the Warriors were kind of brought back down to earth. Then I think people do love Steph Curry.
Yes.
But there was definitely a Steph Curry fatigue that kicked in, no question. And Patrick Mahomes is certainly getting in that area.
Yeah, and it happens with I get it, because I've felt it about other franchises. It happens when teams are winning a lot, whether it's Super Bowls or whether it's just constantly being in the news and the headlines. I get it. The Taylor Swift stuff hasn't helped things, but any great dynasty, eventually there is fatigue. And that's where we're at right now. Where, like, it's no longer viewed as the warrior with confidence. It's viewed as cockiness at times, and it turns people off.
Yeah, and by the way, Shannon's the same way we're watching him. She's like, "Oh, cocky," like somebody will do something cocky. It totally rubs her the wrong way. Speaking, by the way, of your brunch, now let me tell you guys what happened today.
Okay.
I'm looking at this article from WTHR, okay? So there was a restaurant that put together, this actually sounds fabulous to me, a subscription for weekly date nights. Have you heard about this?
I have not.
For $200, this restaurant, now before you guys look and see what restaurant it is, okay, this restaurant, on their website appeared to crash on Monday when their coveted $200 date night pass went on sale, okay? The company did not disclose how many passes were sold, but they claimed that they sold out. A pass includes up to $30 of food and non-alcoholic beverages per use and are valid 52 times a year. So in other words, you buy this pass for $200 and you get essentially $1,500 worth of food because it's good up to 52 times for a $30 credit. At any time that you go into the restaurant, they're giving you $30 every time. You pay $200, you can go once a week and you have a $30 credit once a week.
It sounds like a White Castle promotion.
It kind of does, doesn't it? Can you imagine what you'd get for $30 a White Castle, though?
Yeah. Crave case?
I mean,
maybe
come
2?
on, right?
Tums.
Okay.
They throw that in.
It's sold out like instantly, right? The pass can be used once per 24-hour period, according to the promotion. Only be used once every 24 hours. So I guess you could go like 52 straight days so long as it's 24 hours in between. Applebee's. Now, would you do it?
I would certainly do it. I love Applebee's. Olivia, on the other hand, she does not like Applebee's, so it'd be a no-go.
I used to love Applebee's as a kid, and then as an adult, I started to drift away, and there were rumors they just microwave and reheat their stuff, and they got a bunch of bad press for it. I think Haley likes Applebee's. I would be willing to give it a try, sure.
I used to love the Fiesta Lime Chicken at Applebee's until I saw the caloric count, and I got older, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute.
Greenwood Park Mall Applebee's. My mom would take me there all the time. My mom obviously loved to shop, and I would go there all the time.
Applebee's is one of those places that you live in. I'm not going to disparage some town, but if you live in a smaller town, for example, IndyCar, when we go to Iowa for IndyCar, we stay, unless we stay in Des Moines, which we've done from time to time, but if we stay in one of the small Iowa towns that's not very big, the maid rights are fabulous. But if we're not in Marshalltown, Iowa, we stayed once in Pella, Iowa, there's an Applebee's there, and you're like, okay, I know what it is. It's 9 o'clock. We got to go back to the hotel. Let's get something to eat. And it's enjoyable, right? You get a beer on draft. You know what you're getting. Burgers aren't bad, whatever, right? But for whatever reason, Applebee's has become knocked, right, as this, oh, come on.
Second rate.
You would actually go to Applebee's. Right. And I think you're right. A lot of that is because it's it comes in a plastic bag. They cut it open and then they microwave it.
Chili's knockoff, yeah.
I like Chili's too.
I like Chili's.
Somebody, who was it Neil Brown. I mean, he's a world-renowned chef, so of course he's going to make fun of me for liking Chili's.
Do you remember the Applebee's ad? This would have been when I was a kid, so probably somewhere between late 90s, early 2000s, where it just showed an Applebee's, and it was this high school team that was on the bus after a tough loss, and they're driving up, and everywhere's closed. Man, where are we going to get a meal? And the owner kind of looks out from the Applebee's. He's about to flip the close sign, and he flips to open, and he lets them in. Think that ever happened to anybody, actually?
Well, yeah, because the team picture's on the wall in Applebee's, right? Exactly. Because that's no, you can bet. Actually, most restaurants, when they see a bus, especially teenage kids, are like, oh my gosh, act like we're not here. Turnbuckle Bill's been waiting very patiently on hold for the course of the afternoon. One of my favorites. TB, what's going on?
Hey, man, I've been enjoying every minute of it.
Well, we appreciate it. At some point, you probably just put it on speaker and you've been cleaning the house, right?
I got the house cleaned and everything, and I cleaned the pipe out. Oh no, well, excuse me, I didn't say that. But
we have that effect, Bill.
You know what I'm talking about. But hey, everybody in town gets Reach magazine in the mail. That's that magazine that's got coupons and different people advertise in it. And in January this month, on the very inside cover, they're advertising the All-Star game being here, and get out your calendar and save the dates. The 16th to the 18th at the convention center, according to this ad. And they also got one of those QR codes to scan if you get a hold of an actual physical magazine. more than 350 square feet of basketball and interactive experiences. And there's going to be over 50 NBA players and legend appearances. That's a lot of pictures, man. I'll tell you what, you get 50 NBA players there, there's going to be a lot of photos going to be snapped because that could really make somebody's day.
Now, you'll be down there, right?
Beg your pardon?
You'll be down there, right?
Oh, heck yeah. And they're also going to have 3 days of live music. And I can think of another event that had 3 days of live music for back in the 60s. It was called Woodstock.
Hey, Bill, let me tell you something. This is one of the proudest moments of my life, Bill. In 2019, we were at IndyCar at Pocono, and we had downtime. And so I looked at the calendar, and I'm like, wait a minute. And I'm like, this can't be. And it was. I went to see Ringo Starr and friends at Woodstock on the 50th anniversary of the opening day of the Woodstock Festival. It was awesome. Totally awesome.
Was that the band with like Joe Walsh and just everybody?
Yeah, Santana was there, Ringo Starr was there, Colin Hay was there. There were like 8 different performers that in some capacity had performed at the Woodstock Festival, and they actually now on the Bethel grounds on Max, I forget his last name, but on the farm where the concert was, where the Woodstock Festival was, on those grounds there is an amphitheater. It looks a lot like the Ruoff or Deer Creek, whatever you want to call it. Looks like that on the grounds, but and then you go past that and they have the marker where the actual stage was of Woodstock, and you could see the lake and the pond and the whole deal. It's basically preserved like it was in 1969. It's pretty cool.
It's a iconic place, and it's cool to go check it out and see it. And they got resources around there that allow you to do that. Is that pretty much what they got going on?
Here's
there?
What's funny, like in terms of the Woodstock thing, it's basically like as the crow flies, it's an hour and 30 minutes northwest of New York City, or an hour and change kind of southeast of the Poconos area. And it's a massive area, and literally the one thing you think to yourself, Bill, is you're like, how in the world did anybody find this in 1969? Because it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And when you pull onto the grounds, there's the huge amphitheater, but then outside of that, and that's at the very entrance to the property, then you drive past that, and you can eventually see the huge field in front of you, and they're literally, it's pretty rudimentary, but you can see a clearing of land, and then there's a marker there that says, on this site was the stage, and you can see, and actually they told me, and Bill, I apologize, I forget his last name, Richie, the very first performer of Woodstock. Richie Havens, thank you. Richie Havens, on the stage grounds is where his ashes were sprinkled once he passed away. So it's very historic. It's super cool. And even if you were just passing through town, there's not like a tour you take or anything like that. They do have like a gift shop that has photos and things like that. It's super cool, man. But the All-Star game itself, Bill, I'm you and I both, I remember what a big deal that was in 85 when the Dome, it was kind of the introduction to the world for the Hoosier Dome at that time for basketball. And that's where the All-Star game was, and the dunk contest with Jordan and Wilkins was at MSA. And back then, whoever would have guessed that we would be now some 40 years later at the level that we are in terms of the NBA prominence for Indianapolis and just being able to host big events. But it's going to be super cool event, all 3 days down there. And I have a feeling we'll be certainly talk more about it leading up to it. But just the overall economic impact for Indianapolis and, the spotlight that it's going to put for our city on a stage, and a stage that might have some people that aren't normal, like viewers of Indianapolis sports, going to get a chance to see it. Now, I had asked a question over the weekend on social media. What would be the 4 least desirable NBA markets to live in? What cities of the NBA cities, what 4 would you least want to live in? And I got a ton of people that were like Portland, L.A., the Bay Area, and New York. And I'm like, okay, if we're going to take like the political climate aside, to me, it's about climate. It's about, I guess, there's no wrong answer. It's a personal decision.
How many do I have to give?
4. The 4 cities that you would least want to live in the NBA.
Oklahoma City.
Okay.
There's a lot of places I would like.
To be fair, this question is being asked in most NBA markets. Yep. Indianapolis would be on the list.
Sure. And that's I would probably feel the same way defensively if I lived in Oklahoma City
Correct.
that I do about Indianapolis. This is tough for me because there's a lot of cities that are NBA towns that I really like, but hey, you want 4. Oklahoma City, Sacramento.
Eddie disagreeing, it appears.
Let me get it out.
So would Mike Brown.
Detroit and Utah.
Salt Lake City?
Yeah.
I think Salt Lake City is gorgeous, but I understand. It's.
I didn't want to do it to Sacramento, but again, you got to pick 4.
Okay, Eddie?
I would go Detroit, Oklahoma City, Washington. Last one is the more challenging one, and I'd probably go with Portland.
Yeah, I've been to D.C. I have some family out there. Like I love D.C. Like I really do. But I get it having to pick a team.
So what would your reasoning be for D.C.?
I'm just not. I don't know. I've never been, but everything I've heard is just like unsafe. It's not a good area to be around.
Okay.
Pricing of living, the price of living there.
Cost of living, I'll go with you. Like that's very
astronomical.
What would you not want about Portland?
Constantly raining, constantly gloomy. Weather fluctuates, cold.
That's fair. I mean, the weather would be a fair concern. I personally, Portland to me it's just so. I mean, there's so many things to do around it. I thoroughly enjoy when I go to Portland. But I also, it's interesting that the rain and the gloom of the Northwest in the winter months would certainly be tough. But at the same time, would you rather have 0 degrees and ice everywhere or 40 and raining? Which is a fair question. I think Detroit's got to be up there just because the weather is so bad. And it's just, and then my answers would be almost weather-based, to be honest with you. I've been to every city in the NBA, and I've enjoyed parts about all of them. Cleveland would be on my list. Cleveland, Detroit.
Now, you love this city. What about Milwaukee?
See, Milwaukee, I do love it. The winter would be tough. I mean, there's no doubt. The hardest thing about Milwaukee is it gets dark at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Same
in
thing in terms of tough winters. Like, I would never say this again because I've been there. I have family there, and the summers are spectacular. Minnesota's probably
Minneapolis would be very high because of that. No question. And I agree with you.
Winters are brutal.
And the Twin Cities are fantastic. I love them, right? But, man, the winter would be tough. I mean, that would be hard. You got to plug your car in.
That's always the first text that we get. One of my nephews that lives out there, shout out to Bobby J, he'll send us a picture. It'll be like November 5th, and it's up to, like, the sliding glass door with snow. And I'm like, my goodness, man. Like,
to be honest with you, even though I really like this city and I love and I have a great respect for the grit and the passion and just the loyalty of people towards this city, Philadelphia would be tough for me. Just because, kind of the same reason. It's just the weather. I mean, you know what I mean? So I think I would go almost all like Rust Belt, Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, and then
Toronto.
Oklahoma. See, I like Toronto, but the weather again, the wintertime would be rough. But Toronto's like Chicago. I mean, you could stay indoors in Toronto the whole time and still have a billion. There's a million things to do in Toronto, theater and concerts. That's I think Oklahoma City would be my 4th, Jimmy, just because, no disrespect to Oak City, which is very similar to Indianapolis, but the proximity to other stuff would be what would be difficult for me.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? I mean, you get in a car and you can go anywhere in 3 hours and it's doable, right?
That's why a lot of the East Coast is so attractive to me for that reason, because even if you're in Philly, you drive, get in the car a couple hours, go to New York, like there's that close proximity of having the big
I'll give
cities.
you one that the weather is fantastic, but I'm not a Disney guy. So
Orlando?
Yeah.
Man, I am a Disney guy. I'm sure that'll surprise nobody. That'd be very dangerous to have, for me anyway, to have the Magic there. Like, I'd absolutely get behind them, and then my wife would probably ban me from going to Galaxy's Edge and spending my money on Star Wars things. So love me some Disney trips.
So basically, she was like, "I'll let you have your little NFL friendship beads ring, but you can't also do Star Wars." It was one or the other.
Well, once every 5 years for Star Wars, right? You got to have some type of compromise there. Come on, Jake. We went last January. It's a great time.
For the Star Wars stuff?
Yep.
Is that when you rode around on the Harry Potter ride?
That was 21. That was 2 years prior. Did I tell you that I lost her phone? Have I told that story on here?
No.
Short version of it. You had to get a virtual queue to go on a Harry Potter ride, and only her phone could get in. She could care less. I went with her phone, and it fell out of my pocket on the ride, and that ruined that entire day.
Did you ever find the phone again?
We did. We came back the next day. We had to negotiate with security because we had the tracker on the phone, and we could see it was moving. Like they said, the technicians go through the ride at the end of the night, check for it. They must have found it. They brought it back to Lost and Found. Had to tell our story to 5 people. Finally, they let me go back to the ride area without having to pay to get in. Grabbed it, got the phone. Only one scratch on the back. Still worked for another 2 years.
Why the challenge in because they didn't believe you, or because there are that many people that are dying to get into this kiddie ride?
I would say that Universal Studios communication is not. They have a broken communication system there, Jake.
Okay.
Is what I would say.
All right, fair enough. All right, we'll get back to talking sports. We'll do it. We'll hand it off to John next.
Let Bill Estes put you behind the wheel of the powerhouse.
Hey, first, in the Premier League, this just went off, so if you can still get this live, please do. We got Brighton versus Wolves. I took both teams to score in the final Premier League match of this
Brighton
match
versus
day
who?
21. Brighton versus Wolves. Wolverhampton, the Wolves. Anyway, both teams to score is the direction that I went
Brighton
there.
and Wolves sounds like a Harry Potter sequel.
Doesn't it? It absolutely does. I could see it. Harry Potter and the Brighton and Wolves. There you go. I could see it. Fly it off the bookshelf,
Where do
Jake.
the Brighton Wolves play? In Brighton? Is that right?
Yes. We're going to take the Celtics on the money line on the road against the Dallas Mavericks this evening, even though Kristaps Porzingis is
Are we
supposed to be
giving
out.
gambling tips on soccer matches? Is that what we just did?
We just did that. Welcome in.
There's 3 scores total in the entire thing. What was the wager here?
Both teams will score. Additionally, I'll take the Orlando Magic. We'll scoop the 2. Magic 2-point dogs as they host Cleveland.
Not to kick on soccer, but how lame is a sport where you can bet on whether or not both teams will score?
You're right. If you did it anywhere else, you're not going to get any value
You know what I mean?
on your bet there. By the way, this isn't like a sponsored thing, but one of my favorite things around this time of year is you highlight local restaurants, local dining, getting to experience a ton of stuff around the city in central Indiana, north side, midtown, all that good stuff. Winterfest 2024.
There's no Midtown. We're not in New York.
I'm just going off their labels. I'm not trying to reignite a Derek Schultz debate. I apologize. Winterfest 2024, Devour Indy, where they have a lot of good deals, a lot of good meals you can try at all these different restaurants. The tons of different participating locations. It starts today all the way through February 4th.
How about this? I went to dinner Saturday night. You ready for this? You have the breaking news sounder, Eddie? Breaking news. I went to dinner on Saturday night, ordered a draft beer, and they had it.
Woo!
How about that?
Yes.
How about that?
Is that one of those where you I feel like have to either make a diary note of it or just have a moment of a fist bump that you've conquered that demon?
Well, and you also get to a point where you're like, when you were younger, you'd go somewhere, and if they didn't card you, then you're like, well, we got to remember this place. They didn't card me.
What beer was it?
Now, when I get carded, I'm like, I got to remember this place. They actually carded me. I go to Drake's, and Drake's Lager is actually the Goodwood Lager. So they changed from the Drake's Lager to the Goodwood Lager, but I love it. And they actually said, I go, hey, I'll take a Goodwood. They go, oh, the old Drake's Lager. I go, yeah. And they go, yeah, we have it. And boom.
Do you get upset, or do you think you'll ever reach the age where you get upset when you get carded? I'm not going to out the direct Cook family member, but there are cooks that are taken aback when they get carded because they do not look like they're 21.
Oh, it's the biggest compliment ever. Are you kidding me? Would I ever get upset if I got carded?
Right. 20 years from now,
not.
would you be upset if you got carded?
If I'm 71 years old and they're carding and make me prove I'm 21, hell no. I'm like, I'll remember this place forever. It's the greatest. No, that's the best. It doesn't happen very often, though.
Sure.
It doesn't happen very often at all.
You just stand up and they're like, hey, sir, you're good. I apologize. That was my fault.
Yeah, that's well. Or if I'm wearing a hat and I take it off and they see the gray, they're like, okay, we're good. Busy week for the Pacers, right, Eddie?
Yeah, a very difficult and challenging week continues. They have Denver on tomorrow, which, we talk about all the time. That first game back from a really long road trip is oftentimes still like a road game. Phoenix comes to town, so a very difficult upcoming 4-game homestand for the Indiana Pacers.
The real, I guess, challenge is the wrong word, but the thing to watch is just to see, with Mathurin coming off of, not playing well, trying to get him on track, but just see how everybody meshes with Siakam. And as we talked about with Scott Agness earlier, I don't know that we know definitively the timeline on when, how long does it take? You know what I mean? I mean, Jimmy, if you look at it with Siakam and, Jarris Walker starting to get some minutes, what is the length of time that you would think it would take for everybody to kind of be on the same page, if you will, and then you have a real feel for who they are?
For me, with the uncertainty of if Tyrese Halliburton is good to go and it was just a one-off on injury management for him and they get him back immediately, maybe 2 weeks. If not, I'm not going to rush to a full-scale panic or judgment on it until probably that first stretch back after the All-Star game. I think it's going to take time for that entire roster, not just one or two players, to reestablish what their roles are. And on top of that, Jake, you've mentioned about the Colts and the Pacers over the last couple of months. The goal when you're running a team that feels like they're getting close to the arrival of opening a championship window is not to rush it too quick and overspend and overswing. But at the same time, we mapped out the Paul George fantasy. I'm not saying Paul George, but this coming off season, if you're building around Siakam and Halliburton and Turner, you should be able to have a fair assessment of, do you need one more piece to make this a formidable team, or is a guy like Jarris Walker or a guy like Benedict Mathurin or whoever going to take that step forward next season to where you feel like you already have it in-house? There's so many audition pieces going on right now, but for me, to answer your question, All-Star break for me.
Okay, that's fair. And it is, they're going to have 2 All-Stars, right?
Yes.
I mean, one would assume that that's the case. Have they announced yet who the, if they are, my apologies that I don't know it off the top of my head, have they announced yet who the participants will be in 3-point and dunk contest and that kind of thing?
No.
That's usually like a TNT special the last couple years, if I remember correctly. Like a TNT Thursday, and they'll have all that. They'll announce.
Because I would assume that there will be, at the very least, a Pacer in the 3-point shootout, right? Or dunk.
Probably Tyrese again, right?
Yeah, but he's going to be, he'll be in the All-Star game. I would think because it's in Indiana, they will want a participant in each.
You think
aspect.
Obi turns back the clock and enters the dunk contest
I would
again?
think Obi Toppin would be your dunk contest participant, right?
Well, if he's still here, right?
Well, yeah, because the deadline is the 8th. That's the other thing, the unique aspect of, I'm curious how teams change, if at all, their philosophies with having the trade deadline now prior to NBA All-Star Weekend versus you still had kind of that lull period and there was still recruiting conversations going on at that event. How does that change the mentality and the purposefulness that front offices operate with?
How many Pacer dunk contest participants can you name historically?
I'm failing on the spot, so
Eddie?
I'm going to say 0.
Gerald Green and Glenn Robinson. That's all I got.
Fred Jones won it.
Okay.
Terrence Stansbury. Paul George. Did you say Paul George?
I forgot he did.
Oh, yeah, I forgot he did it.
He had like weird, glitzy, like shiny looking shoes. I remember that. And then he went out, and I think he went out in like the first round, right?
Yes. Yes.
And then 3-point shootout.
Victor Oladipo did the dunk contest as well.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say.
Because he did the Black Panther mask.
That's right. I do recall that. But I'm old guy when it comes to that. And the dunk contest to me, I'm like, you know what? It's never as good as back when I was a kid. It's always been my theory and philosophy on that.
Haven't been a ton of Pacers 3-point shooters.
Reggie's done it, right?
Correct, but he did it like 5 times. And then, you want to play the game or do you want me to just read them off?
Yeah, go ahead and read them off.
Granger, George, Heald, and Halliburton.
Okay. JMV's up next. He just walked out. James, he is here, right? Okay. John's up next. We'll be back with you tomorrow at noon. Stephen Holder, I think John's going to talk to you today. We'll talk Purdue as well tomorrow. Thanks for listening, everybody. Back at it at noon tomorrow. You've been listening to Aquarium Company here on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
The Ride with JMV.
Bobby Marks with us, Pascal Siakam. We're his